Chapter 1349. After listening to Lin Qiao's explanation of the situation outside, everyone revealed a surprised expression. Then they all looked like they were in deep thought. You mean this thing has a huge appetite and needs a lot of energy? The underground creatures we encountered on the surface were all below level 6 or 7, so there are almost no creatures below level 5 in this space. That means it doesn't need to prey on these low-level creatures at all. It should be able to leave them alone. Duan Wan analyzed the information given by Lin Qiao and said aloud. Then why did it suddenly chase out these creatures that it doesn't care about? Lu Tianyi crossed his arms in front of his chest and suddenly thought of a problem. By the way, the plants we found along the way seem to be in good condition. In other words, these creatures shouldn't eat the food underground. Does it mean that the creatures below are carnivores and not herbivores? Lin Qiao said, each of these plants contains the energy in the fog layer above. Maybe they can't eat these plants. After all, they can even eat soil when they come to the surface. I've felt that this situation is more or less related to the thick layer of energy above this space. From the creatures they encountered before, and when they saw Big Red appear, it completely avoided the energy tornadoes that fell from the sky. And it was even more obvious when they reached the river. Could it be that there was something wrong with the energy that affected them and caused them to be chased out by the level 9 creature? Yuan Tianxing said at this time. Could it be that this level 9 creature has encountered a critical situation? Or perhaps there's some change in the energy layer above this underground space. We have no idea what the level 9 creature's intention is for chasing these low-level creatures out, whether it's good or bad. So it's very difficult to find the reason. Based on the current situation, you have to continue to spend time observing the actions of this level 9 creature and whether there will be any big changes in the energy layer above this space. Only then will you know the answer. This was because studying nature and wild animals was something that required a lot of time and observation. Lin Qiao narrowed her eyes and looked outside. After seeing that it was still very calm, she retracted her gaze. She opened her eyes and nodded thoughtfully. That's true. I just don't know how much this big guy will eat at one time. The rank 7 and 8 creatures here are all huge, but after seeing the nest of this rank 9 creature, I reckon that this big fellow is many times bigger than those rank 8 creatures. At the very least, a dozen tons of prey might not even be enough for it to eat. I guessed. However, if he could see this guy eating, then observe its habits and the frequency and amount of food it ate, he should be able to get more information. There's always a reason for the changes in nature. This big guy must have a special reason for doing this, Lu Tianyi said. I'm more curious about what this thing looks like. We've never seen these underground creatures before. They all look very strange. It's really rare. Li Jing muttered from the corner. Speaking of these level 9 creatures, they had yet to see any creatures that they had never seen before. Humans' curiosity and desire for knowledge were really strong. Although they were afraid of the unknown, they were also curious and wanted to know the truth and so on. In order to know more about this rank 9 creature, Lin Qiao brought some people to guard the edge of its nest and waited patiently. Time passed day by day. The zombies in the space didn't need to eat, but the group of humans did. Fortunately, Lin Qiao had everything in the space. She also brought enough dry food for the people who left. On the 8th day there was still no movement. However, it was time to send someone back to the surface to report the situation. So Lin Qiao came out of the space again. On the way back she had a more accurate target than when she went, so her speed was much faster. However, she ran out of the territory of the rank 9 creature and controlled her ability to accelerate. Lin Qiao spent most of the day to return to the river. When she reached the river, Lin Qiao stopped for a while. With the previous experience, she didn't fly over slowly. Instead, she accelerated and flew over. Sure enough, even if she accelerated in the blink of an eye, when she passed 2/3 of the river, there was a sudden gust of wind above her head. Hundreds of tornadoes fell from the sky. However, this wasn't much of an obstacle for Lin Qiao. Last time was the first time she was in an unknown situation. For safety's sake, she was cautious and slow. This time she clearly knew that she couldn't stay on the river for too long. Otherwise, those flying fishes would be attracted. So she increased the control of her ability and successfully passed through the river. She continued to rush toward the cave that she came from. Among the group of people that Lin Qiao brought, there wasn't anyone with invisibility ability. Therefore, to send them out for safety's sake, they had to go up in groups of 3. 1 human with ability and 2 from the zombie army. Moreover, the cave needed to be sent up by someone who could fly. Otherwise it would be a bit troublesome for them to climb up. The top of the rock wall was sloping upwards. Both sides were sloping inwards because the bottom of the cave was big and the top was small. They weren't like those underground creatures that could climb up the wall. When they were not far from the cave, Lin Xiao smelled the scent of some living people. Her eyes flashed. That woman from China still left people here. She really didn't know what was good for her. The people who stayed here were at most rank 6. After Lin Xiao went over, she waved a black flame and engulfed all of them in an instant. She released Li Zhang and the 2 rank 1st kings before sending them straight up to the top of the cave. When they jumped down, it took a long time, and it took them a long time to get up. Fortunately, Lin Xiao could fly, so she successfully sent Li Zhang and the other 2 up. After coming down, Lin Xiao didn't leave immediately. Instead, she waited on the spot. Sure enough, not long after, Qingshan Base and Kong Qingming's team returned. Xiadong, Lu Feng, and the others that Lin Xiao sent out earlier also appeared. I knew you would come back here at this time. How is it? Did you find any other way out? Lin Xiao looked at them and asked. Lei Qing shook his head. Apart from this rock wall, there really isn't any other way up. Xiadong and the others shook their heads. Lin Xiao looked at them and noticed that apart from Xiadong's team, Lu Feng and Kong Qingming's teams were in a bit of a mess. It seemed that they had encountered some aggressive things these days. Chapter 1350. Even the ones that Lin Xiao encountered weren't easy to deal with. Seeing that Xiadong and the others were still standing there in good condition, she heaved a sigh of relief. Did the messenger go up? After Lei Qing arrived and saw Lin Xiao, he knew that she should have sent the messenger up. Lin Xiao nodded. Yes. Did you guys find anything? At the beginning we encountered people from Huaxia who came looking for trouble, but we avoided them. The others realized that the creatures that could fly and run in this underground space were all very high level. Moreover, the creatures and plants in this underground space seemed to advance several times faster than the mutated beasts on the surface. Level 7 and 8 beasts can be seen everywhere. Kong Qingming put his hands in his pockets and said as he thought about the situation he had encountered these days. Lei Qing nodded. That's true. The plants and creatures in this space are all very powerful and dangerous. Lin Xiao didn't tell them that Xia Longyun had left people here. There was no need to say it since it had already been dealt with. I got some clues and found some things. There's a level 9 creature in this space. It should be the strongest ruler in this space. It suddenly chased all the low-level creatures out. But I don't know why. From what I observed, that thing has a big appetite. It should eat a lot in one meal, but the creatures left in this space shouldn't be able to sustain it for a long time. She said to everyone. She meant that after it finished eating the level 7 and 8 creatures, it would probably use the small ones to fill up its food. But the problem was that it chased all the small ones out. While Lin Xiao was sharing the clues with the others, the level 9 creature lurking in the deep pit in the middle of the underground space opened its 2 huge eyes once again. Then there was a tremor, and the uneven ground at the bottom of the pit was arched up by something. An incomparably huge creature slowly climbed up, its 2 huge mirror-like eyes flashing with a hint of light. It slowly raised its head. After its whole body emerged from the ground, its torso also rose up. Its 2 huge front paws propped up and then its 2 hind legs. When its whole body emerged from the ground, a strange beast-shaped pit immediately appeared. The huge creature stood up and shook its body. Its huge head twisted left and right and its 2 huge eyes that were 2 meters in diameter looked around. In fact, when it stood up from the bottom of the pit, its whole body was tens of meters tall. But it was still supporting itself with its 4 legs. From head to tail its body was more than 300 meters long. After it stood up, the energy mist layer above it began to surge. Then a huge whirlpool descended from the sky, slowly descending above its head. After the commotion on this side spread, the creatures within 100 kilometers of this wasteland panicked and ran in all directions. All of them, including the level 8 underworld creatures, returned to their caves and hid in their own caves. The behemoth stood quietly at the bottom of its own pit. When the energy vortex above it descended, it raised its head and opened its huge mouth to withstand the energy vortex that descended from above. Lin Xiao, who was in the middle of speaking, suddenly stopped and looked in the direction of the level 9 creature. Then she squinted her eyes and looked at the fog above her head. The layer of thick fog above her head was slowly moving in that direction. Lin Xiao squinted her eyes and saw that the layer of energy was also converging in that direction. Seeing that Lin Xiao suddenly stopped talking and looked up at the sky, the others also looked up in confusion. What's the situation? Is the fog moving in that direction? Lin Xiao opened her eyes and said, "It's awake. All of you stay here and don't move. I'll go and take a look myself." It was a good opportunity to observe that creature. She had been waiting for it to wake up. It didn't wake up while she was waiting, but it woke up after she left. After Lin Xiao finished speaking, he disappeared in a flash, leaving the crowd looking at each other. They didn't dare to follow her, because Lin Xiao said that the level 9 creature had woken up. Behind him, Lin Xiaoyin used the method of leaping and quickly advanced in that direction. Her running speed was much faster than the fog above her head, but she had to use her ability to cross the river. Maybe it was because of the abnormal situation above, but when Lin Xiao flew over, there was no energy tornado. After flying over the river, she immediately switched to stealth mode and continued to move forward. She wasn't sure if the creature could sense her from such a distance, but it was best not to be discovered. After Lin Xiao ran to the desolate place, she slowed down and jogged into the wasteland. After arriving here, she felt a lot of pressure. Although her instincts kept telling her not to get close, she couldn't get any closer. But how could she get a tiger cub without entering the tiger's den? If she didn't get close, how could she observe the creature's intentions? She looked at the fog above her head quickly gathering in the direction of the deep pit. When Lin Xiao was a few hundred meters away from the pit, she found that she had reached her limit. She couldn't get any closer. Not only was the level 9 creature emitting an aura stronger than the level 9 Dong Xiaowei, but even the energy fog above her was condensing a powerful pressure. Although Lin Xiao wasn't afraid, her body was somewhat out of control. Her hands and feet began to not listen to her, as if her instincts were stripping away her consciousness. She stood in place, motionless as she looked at the nest of the level 9 creature. This situation immediately made her feel that something was wrong. Because she almost forgot that she almost lost control before, her zombie instincts almost robbed her of her body. The energy fog in the deep pit was getting heavier and lower. But at this moment, the deep pit suddenly burst. Roar dash, a loud roar came from there, and then the energy fog above suddenly exploded. Billowing waves of air rolled out in all directions. The power of this roar was so strong that Lin Xiao's whole body shook. Her whole mind instantly became light, and then there was a moment of blurriness. At the last moment, a thought flashed through Lin Xiao's consciousness, and she reacted in time to pull herself into the space. Bang dash. The way she entered the space wasn't too normal because she fell from above. But she was already unable to control her body, and her whole consciousness entered an erratic state. Chapter 1351. The place where Lin Xiao fell into the space was the open space in front of the small building. She lay on the ground with her eyes completely black. It was so black that even her eyeballs had melted and disappeared. Ugh, roar. Lin Xiao felt that her body was slowly losing control. She wanted to concentrate on controlling her body. But she found that she was powerless. After Lin Xiao came in, the zombies and other mutant beasts in the space quickly noticed that her situation was a bit strange. Her breath was bursting out in a mess, and the energy in her body was also changing bit by bit with this kind of strange disorder. It started to become strange, but it also seemed normal. Lin Xiao bared her teeth and rolled on the ground with a somewhat fierce expression. She lay on the ground with her palms wide open and dug into the ground. Sharp black nails that were 2 or 3 centimeters long grew on her fingers, leaving a deep groove on the ground. Roar dash. Lin Xiao lay on the ground with both hands deeply scratching the ground. She suddenly raised her head and let out a zombie's roar. She opened her mouth and let out a zombie-like roar, but when she opened her mouth, the upper and lower rows of teeth were different. His teeth, which were originally flat, had now become sharp. It wasn't like in the beginning when only 2 of her canines were sharp, but now all of her teeth had become sharp. Sharp, dense, and oppressive, this was the original form of a zombie. Seeing Lin Xiao's abnormal change, the dozen or so zombies that were originally walking in the vegetable field all stood still and stared at Lin Xiao. The level 4 zombies in Lin Xiao's army had not yet recovered their human memories. But many of them had been trained to remember some common sense. At this time, these level 4 zombies instinctively felt that the current Lin Xiao had become strange and was not the leader they knew before. Especially now that Lin Xiao was now a level 8 zombie emperor, and her breath was still everywhere. Her pressure completely suppressed them. So now these level 4 zombies were not standing there voluntarily, but they were frozen. They were completely unable to resist Lin Xiao's pressure, and their bodies were no longer under their own control. Their entire consciousness was completely suppressed by the pressure that was 4 levels higher than them, and they didn't even have the ability to think. He could only stand still and look in Lin Xiao's direction. Roar, roar, Lin Xiao's body was on the ground. His 2 hands were still grabbing the ground in front of him while his 2 legs kicked a few times. She suddenly retracted her 2 arms and began to slowly prop herself up with her 4 limbs. After slowly propping herself up like a wild beast, she slowly raised her head from the ground on all 4s. Her long hair, which had fallen down due to her rolling on the ground just now, was disheveled and supported her face. Ayo ayo? Hua Hua, who had been left in the space, ran to the edge of the forest. It stared at Lin Xiao in confusion. It wanted to go over and see what was happening to Lin Xiao, but it didn't dare to go over due to Lin Xiao's abnormal change in aura. The cages of chickens, ducks and geese that were sent to the back of Lin Xiao's 3 buildings had all shrunk into the corners of the cages, not daring to move. The mutant beasts on the other side of the lake had all disappeared. Lin Xiao's body used her 4 limbs to prop herself up on the ground. Her body arched back and forth, then she slowly raised her head. The face under her hair was very sinister. From the corner of her eyes, there were a few strange black lines that were faintly discernible. A pair of strange black eyes peeked out from between the gaps of her hair. She slowly lifted her upper body, then stood up bit by bit without wavering. But after she stood up, her posture was somewhat unnatural. After standing up, her head drooped down again. Both of her knees were bent, and her 5 fingers forcefully opened and closed, then opened and closed again. At this time, the other zombies felt that her aura was completely different from before. It was as if she was a completely different zombie. The people who were left outside the space didn't know about this. However, after the rank 9 creature roared and exploded the condensed energy mist above it, it didn't take long for the level 9 creature to explode. The energy fog began to disperse. The level 9 creature lifted its front legs and climbed to the edge of the deep pit, slowly climbing out of the nest. Bang, bang. After reaching the surface, this huge monster shook the ground with every step it took. As it walked, it moved its head left and right, its heavy body slowly moving forward. As it walked, its feet began to slowly step into the void as if it was walking up a flight of stairs, 1 step at a time. It was as if there was an invisible ladder beneath its feet supporting it as it walked upwards. The giant monster, which was still very heavy on the ground, walked into the void. When it walked up to the empty space, its body became very light. When it walked up to a height of 700 to 800 meters, it stopped. Its 2 huge eyes looked around for a while, then it suddenly stared in one direction. And the people of Sea City and Green Mountain, who were a few hundred kilometers away, after feeling this aura, each of them felt as if there was something pressing down on their heads. Not only did this pressure suppress the feelings in their hearts, but it also suppressed the restrictions on their bodies. It seems that this big guy is really strong. How is the difference between this and the pressure of your base's leader? Kong Qingming looked in that direction and couldn't help but ask Lei Qing. Lei Qing expressionlessly looked in the same direction as him. After hearing his question, Lei Qing nodded. After a few seconds of silence, he said, "It's much stronger than our leader when he was at his peak. It doesn't seem like it's on the same level." The others looked at each other, especially the people of Sea City. They couldn't help but reveal a worried expression. They hoped that their leader wouldn't be unlucky enough to find out. Even if it was a level 8 zombie emperor, it would probably be unlucky if it encountered this thing. After all, it was a level 9 monster that could even sense them from a few hundred kilometers away. Lei Qing was also aware of his autistic leader's explosive strength. When Dong Xiaowei's ability erupted the last time, he destroyed 60% of the buildings in their original base. If this guy went up, it would not take long for him to completely destroy their intact base. Therefore, their strength was really not on the same level. In such a situation, it was best to hide as far as possible. Is it going to get up to look for food? I really don't know how much it will eat. Kong Qingming guessed that this guy should be hungry. Our leader said that a large level 8 monster might not be enough for it to eat. At this time, Li Jing said aloud. Chapter 1352. The gigantic monster stared in a certain direction from high up in the sky. Suddenly, It swung its tail with a whoosh. Then the huge silhouette suddenly disappeared. The next second after it disappeared, its figure appeared above the forest on the outskirts of the barren land. As soon as it appeared there, its huge figure blocked the light and the area below became pitch black. The level 9 monster lowered its head and looked around. Suddenly, it opened its mouth and pointed at a spot on the ground. Following that, a rainbow light shot out from its mouth, illuminating the area within a radius of tens of meters. Caw caw caw. After it shone the light in its mouth for a few seconds, the plants on the ground instantly withered. Then the withered branches fell to the ground and immediately broke into the same soil as the ground. After these plants had all withered and turned into soil, the ground immediately sank down with a few muffled sounds. Roar. Then there was a sudden roar from the ground. Then a level 8 monster suddenly rushed out from the ground. After the monster rushed out, it did not rush to fight the level 9 monster. Instead it turned around and ran. However, before it could rush a meter away, it was suddenly slapped to the ground by a claw from the sky and pinned to the ground. Roar. The level 8 monster with horns all over its body was pressed down. It only had time to raise its head and roar in despair. In the next second it was immediately bitten down by a big mouth. Gotcha. The level 9 monster's body was 3 to 4 times the size of the level 8 monster. Of course, its head was also bigger than the level 8 monster. So with one bite, the level 8 monster's entire head and neck were bitten open. The monster's blood splattered everywhere and dripped on the surrounding plants, immediately melting them. However, the level 9 monster chewed with relish and swallowed it in a few bites. Then it lowered its head and bit off the rest of the head. After eating, it used its claws to grab the prey's entire body and put the neck into its mouth. Then it began to suck. What Lin Xiao said earlier was not wrong. A level 8 monster that was dozens of meters long was not enough to fill its stomach. The level 8 monster, which had horns all over its body and looked like a giant lizard, was quickly drained of its blood by the level 9 monster. Then he began to chomp down on the food. Lin Xiao, who originally wanted to see the level 9 monster eat, missed the scene she wanted to see. Lin Xiao felt like she was trapped in a dark place. She was not standing but lying down. However, she didn't feel anything lying on the ground. Without anything to support her, she felt like she was floating in the air. She struggled to move her hands and feet, but found that because there was no support under her body, she couldn't even control her body. However, she had a premonition that she had to stand up as soon as possible. Otherwise, she might regret the consequences. So she tried to control her body to turn over, but at this moment something seemed to surge out from the dark, then stuck to her body and pulled her down. At this time Lin Xiao's body, which was Lu Tianyu's body, stood in front of the small building. She moved her 10 fingers. Her back was arched, her legs were bent in an O shape and her long hair was messily hanging down. Just as Lin Xiao began to struggle in the darkness, she suddenly held her head with both hands. Then a low and deep roar came from her mouth. Hu. The more Lin Xiao struggled in the darkness, the louder the roar from Lu Tianyu's body. Hu roar. At this time, Lu Tianyu's body's movements and actions were completely like an ordinary zombie that had just evolved to level 2. She instinctively held her head and roared again and again, and her body uncontrollably squatted down again. Her hands were still holding her head. Just as she squatted down with her head in her hands, her breathing began to become chaotic again. At this time Lin Xiao had slowly begun to get used to what was going on in this dark space. And the invisible things that stuck to her and wanted to pull her down should be the spiritual power of Lu Tianyu, who had turned into a zombie. After feeling that the other party's pulling force was not very strong, Lin Xiao immediately concentrated and struggled to stand up again. She also found that as long as she concentrated, her movements seemed to be smoother. Lin Xiao used all her strength to slowly stand up, and then gradually found that the darkness in front of her was slowly receding. Then her whole body suddenly shook, her eyes lit up and she saw the scene in front of her clearly. She put down her hands that were holding her head and looked down at her nails. With a thought, she retracted all her nails. Lin Xiao breathed a sigh of relief, then raised her hand and pushed the scattered hair on her face to the back of her head. Then she looked around. She found that she was still in her own space. The zombies around her who were standing still felt the pressure on their bodies ease up. But they stared at Lin Xiao with some lingering fear and took a few steps back. Lin Xiao glanced at them and didn't say anything, then she narrowed her eyes and looked outside. When she looked outside from the space, her field of vision was not very far. So she was still in the barren environment when she entered the space before. In this situation, she could only flash outside to explore the distance. Thinking of this, Lin Qiao opened her eyes. The darkness in her eyes slowly receded, and the black lines at the corner of her eyes disappeared. After taking a few deep breaths, Lin Qiao finally subdued the messy energy in her body. Then she flashed and disappeared from the space. When she came out of the space, Lin Qiao immediately felt the strong aura of a level 9 beast that seemed to be able to be sensed no matter where she was in this underground space. Lin Qiao immediately rushed in the direction of the level 9 creature. As she got closer and closer, she finally found that the other party's aura was contaminated with the aura of other creatures. That aura was level 8. There was also a strong smell of blood. That guy was eating, but she didn't know how many it had eaten. There was only a smell on its body. It seemed like it had only eaten one. As she got closer and closer to the level 9 creature, Lin Qiao felt more and more pressure. At this moment, the other party suddenly began to move, and in an instant it suddenly went in another direction. Lin Qiao was stunned. She didn't directly chase after the other party, but first went to the place where it was eating. Looking at the big hole there were some monster limbs beside it and the smell of blood everywhere. Lin Qiao knew that it was eaten just now. Huh. Didn't this guy grab its prey and drag it back to its nest to eat? Why did it eat it here? Chapter 1353. After looking at the remains left behind by the level 9 creature, Lin Qiao leaped onto a tree and carefully sensed the level 9 creature's movements. Soon she found out why the level 9 creature did not drag the prey back to the cave. It was because it was still hunting. Roar, bang bang, a roar and some tremors came from the other side. Another level 8 subterranean beast was dragged out by it. The two energies collided a few times, but they quickly calmed down. Lin Qiao stomped her feet and leaped over there. Her transparent figure flew over the top of the thicket and quickly approached the level 9 creature. Although she didn't see the battle with her own eyes, she could guess that the 8th tier subterranean exotic beast couldn't last more than 3 moves against the 9th tier subterranean exotic beast based on the changes in the collision of the two auras. When Lin Qiao approached, she saw a familiar bloody scene from afar. The huge beast's claws were pressing down on another subterranean beast that was much smaller than it. The beast lowered its head and opened its mouth wide, tearing at the prey under its claws. She finally saw the creature's true appearance. Why did the subterranean beasts get bigger the higher the level? This monster was at least a few hundred meters long and tens of meters tall. It had the appearance of a prehistoric giant beast. She had never seen such an appearance before. Fortunately, it wasn't like the big fish from before, which had a mushroom-shaped head. This guy looked quite formidable. His 4 strong limbs were covered with bone spurs, and he had 2 short horns on his head. From the back of his head all the way to his back, his entire spine was covered with spikes that pointed towards the sky. Rows of spikes also grew out from its tail. There were also 2 spikes at the corners of its 2 huge eyes. From afar it looked a bit like its tail eyelashes. It had a long and sharp mouth shape and it could open very wide. Its mouth was full of blood and dirt. This was the scene of a beast eating. It was considered common in the post-apocalyptic world. However, this creature was too big and the scene was indeed a bit scary. Lin Qiao quietly leaned over and clearly saw this guy burying its head and chewing for a while. After a while, this guy finished eating a prey that was half its size. Then, after finishing his meal, he stood up and raised one of his claws to lick it. Suddenly, he leaped into the air and disappeared in the blink of an eye. After Lin Qiao raised his head and watched it disappear, he suddenly twisted his face and looked in another direction. He couldn't help but reveal a confused expression. Lin Qiao was able to capture the direction in which it disappeared. But this guy wasn't heading back to his nest. Instead, he was heading in another direction. Lin Qiao thought to himself, this guy isn't full yet. He had to continue catching them. Moreover, looking at the current situation, whoever it set its eyes on would not be able to escape. It was as if this was the prey in its own yard, and it could catch it whenever it wanted. As he continued to observe, the big guy caught one prey after another and started eating on the spot. Behind him, Lin Qiao silently counted how big this guy's appetite was and how many he would eat. Until it ate the 13th one, it stopped. Lin Qiao watched as it bit the last prey to death, but it didn't continue eating like the previous ones. Instead, it picked up the prey's corpse and leaped into the air before flying back to its nest. This time it flew much slower than before. Previously it disappeared in the blink of an eye. Now it was like taking a stroll after eating its fill. It actually ate more than a dozen level 8 creatures for a meal. Its appetite was indeed terrifying. If it were to reach the surface, wouldn't it starve to death? Because there weren't as many level 8 mutated beasts on the surface. It wasn't enough for it to eat at this rate. Lin Xiao followed the level 9 creature to its nest and saw it lying in the pit, slowly gnawing on the last prey. If it ate so many at once, how long would it need to go out to hunt? If the hunting cycle was too short, it wouldn't take long before it ran out of food. Thinking about those low-level underground creatures that were chased out, they ate everything as if they had been starving for a long time. Could it be that there wasn't enough food and intake underground for them to level up quickly and meet the hunting requirements of the level 9 creature? If these low-level creatures lived on the surface for a period of time, with the rich resources on the surface to replenish their energy, they would level up quickly. After the creatures below were eaten, the level 9 creature would go up again. By then, the creatures on the surface would have grown to a sufficient level to eat. The level 9 creature that was eating meat in its nest didn't know that there was an intruder beside its nest. Although Lin Xiao guessed that the purpose of this big guy was to chase those low-level creatures to the surface so that they could grow faster. After a while, when it went up, there would be enough food. While Lin Xiao was observing the monster, Wei Haichao, who was in the Chinese base on the ground, received news that the mission he sent out had failed. He was gloomy as he stared at the report. He hadn't expected that even after sending someone with a special invisibility skill, they would still end up in failure. How did the people from the universal base discover her? Looking at this news, he was afraid that when he handed it to Xikong Chen, he would be scolded again. Wei Haichao sighed and stood up. He walked out of his office with the information and walked towards Xikong Chen's office. Xikong Chen was still looking at the information in his office. When he felt someone come in, he raised his head and glanced at him. Then he lowered his head and continued reading. What's wrong? Did the mission fail again? Wei Haichao stood in front of him with a puzzled expression. How did you know? You saw through it? He thought that Xikong Chen must have seen through him from his expression. After handing him the report, Wei Haichao sat on the chair in front of his desk. I really don't understand why this universal base is so difficult to deal with. Could it be that during this mission, there was someone in their team who also had a special ability? His nose is so sharp that he found it? Xikong Chen put down the information in his hand and took a look at the report. Then he threw it on the table and said, It seems that we still can't sneak in. How's the situation at the base? Is there anyone that can be used? Wei Haichao shook his head. There are very few people coming out from that base. Those that come out will be watched by the base. It's not good for us to get close. Xikong Chen said expressionlessly, No matter what, let them try all the methods as soon as possible. We don't have much time to wait. Wei Haichao immediately looked up at him and asked, Why, are you preparing to start the plan? Chapter 1354. Xikong Chen turned to the back of his chair and looked at him. Professor Bai has been in a bad mood these days, so he didn't object when I suggested this. Looking at his current state, he shouldn't be in the mood to care about this matter. Wei Haichao asked him, When are you going to start? Xikong Chen said, Let's see the news from the underground first. I didn't expect that woman Xia Longyun to be killed so quickly. I thought she would be of some use. She wasted such a precious medicine. As he spoke, he showed a somewhat disdainful look. Wei Haichao looked at him and was silent for 2 seconds before saying, Weren't you also very confident at the beginning? Why did you announce your failure so quickly? This slap in the face was also very quick. Xikong Chen glanced at him. Logically speaking, with her special skills, she couldn't have died even if she couldn't kill that woman. I don't know what happened to her. Maybe it was an accident. We don't know the situation underground, but Professor Bai said that the situation down there isn't a place that humans like us can go casually. Wei Haichao nodded and didn't say anything else. On the other side, Li Zheng and the other two returned to the ground safely. They finally saw the sunlight and the 3 of them heaved a sigh of relief. There were a few groups of people guarding the entrance. When they saw Li Zheng and the other 2 come out, they immediately rushed over. When they saw Li Zheng and the other 2 come out, they immediately stared at him. Li Zheng and the other 2 had just climbed out of the cave and stood on the ground for a few seconds. Suddenly they stomped their feet and jumped up. Bang, bang, bang. A few gunshots came and a few bullets hit the place where the three of them had been. "Who is it?" Li Jing shouted, landing on a tree branch at the side. He stared coldly in the direction where the bullets came from. "Don't go too far. We're still here. What do you want?" At this time another voice came. Li Jing turned his head and looked at the second voice. He saw Xiao Liqing and his people appear over there. He immediately leaped towards them. "No, we just want to invite this person back for a cup of tea." Another voice came at this time. It was obviously the people who had just fired. Li Jing looked at those people and saw that it was Li Yuelong, one of the deputy leaders of Huaxia. It was as if they weren't the ones who had fired the gun just now. They spoke as if nothing had happened. Although he said that he wanted to invite him for tea, he just wanted to cut off the first batch of information that came from the underground. Not only did they want to get it first, but they also didn't want others to know about it. In a situation where everyone was present, they could still attack without any scruples. Obviously, he did not intend to pretend to be at peace with Sea City. Xiao Liqing sneered and said, "Sorry, they're on our side. Since you don't want to cooperate properly, then wait for your own people to bring the news up. We won't be sharing information. Goodbye." As they spoke, they prepared to leave with their men. However, the people from Huaxia would not let them go so easily. "Stop right there. Since we're working together, of course we have the right to know this information. You don't have the right to monopolize this information." Li Yuelong waved his hand and his men immediately blocked Xiao Liqing's way. Li Jing said coldly, "What do you mean by moving together? Why don't I know? When we went down we said that we'll act separately. What does that have to do with you?" As he said that, he turned to Xiao Liqing and said, "Let's go." Swoosh swoosh swoosh. At this time the people from Huaxia suddenly pulled out their guns and aimed at them. They had no intention of letting them go. "No one can leave today. Since you're not willing to follow us obediently, then we can only make it so that you can't go anywhere. But I still advise you to follow us quietly. Otherwise, if we fight, you'll only be at a disadvantage. Isn't that right?" Li Yuelong said coldly. He himself was not a level 7 arcanist but a level 6. But he had a lot of people now. Just as he blocked Xiao Liqing's way, there were already dozens of level 4 and level 5 arcanists. And behind him stood a group of people. Although Xiao Liqing also brought dozens of people, the number of arcanists he had was not as high as the other side and their levels were not high. If they really fought with Huaxia's protective equipment, weapons and arcanists, Sea City would indeed be at a disadvantage. However, Xiao Liqing and Li Jing were not worried about this. They looked at each other. And calmly said to Li Yuelong, "You people from Huaxia really do whatever you want. Do you really think we'll be afraid of you?" Seeing that the two sides were getting more and more angry, it seemed like they were about to fight. Suddenly a female voice came from the side and said, Hey, what's going on? Huaxia, it's not that I want to criticize you. You people really want to solve problems with guns at every turn. You're very confident in your weapons." Both sides turned their heads and saw a girl with long wavy hair and a baby face standing on a tree on the other side. She had one hand on her waist and the other on the tree trunk. She looked at the people from Huaxia and said disdainfully. Behind her, a row of people also flashed and stood not far away, each of them wearing sunglasses so that people could not see their faces clearly. "I thought that your Qingshan base was going to wait until we started to fight before showing up. Isn't it a little too hasty to come out now?" After Li Yuelong saw Yi Ingyue, he first looked at her face and body twice, then raised a hint of a smile with unknown meaning. Yi Ingyue shrugged and said angrily, "You should thank me for coming out to stop you. Otherwise you people would be out of luck, you know?" The strong disdain in her tone immediately made Li Yuelong's face sink. He stared at her gloomily and said, "Bad girl, are you looking down on us from Huaxia?" Yi Ingyue looked at him with a confused face and said, "What? Is your Huaxia very powerful?" "Oh, not bad. You do have a lot of people." "Yeah, you're right. We have a lot of people. I think you want to see what happens if you dare to provoke us, so I'll let you have a try." Li Yuelong stared at her gloomily and then waved his hand. The people behind him instantly turned the guns in their hands and shot at Yi Ingyue and the others. Bang bang bang, a series of gunshots rang out and they moved. Those people from Huaxia who were blocking Xiao Liqing and the others immediately pulled the trigger at the same time. And Xiao Liqing and the others quickly reacted and jumped away from where they were. At this time, two figures flashed over from afar. They stood on a hill not far from the underground entrance and watched the battle from a distance. Chapter 1355. Two figures, one black and one white, stood at the side. The woman in the white dress had long black hair and a pair of beautiful eyes that were dyed black. The man beside her was extraordinarily handsome. His mouth was curled up into a faint smirk, his demonic aura was overflowing. That's right, it was Mo Yen who appeared with his loyal female subordinate. Currently he was still at rank 6 and had yet to return to rank 7. However, he was currently on the verge of breaking through to rank 7 and would break through soon. This was because he had cultivated in Lin Qiao's space for a period of time and drank a lot of lake water from Lin Qiao's space every day. Therefore, his recovery had been relatively smooth, otherwise he would not have been able to reach rank 6 so quickly in such a short period of time. Of course, the beautiful zombie beside him had also helped him a lot in the beginning. She helped him hunt for zombie nuclei, but because he did not have many lightning element nuclei, he could not quickly digest the energy of other elements. Therefore, the beautiful zombie also helped him find a lot of mutant plant energy nuclei, because the energy inside the mutant plant energy nuclei was easier to absorb. Mo Yen stood far away and observed the situation of the battle. The people from Huaxia obviously had the advantage in numbers. They attacked directly in such a blatant manner. It seems like they no longer wanted to pretend to be at peace with Haiqing or sentient base. They had already shed all pretense of cordiality. However, even if the Chinese side had a lot of people, and all of them were metahumans with high defensive equipment. Although Xiao Liqing's group was having a hard time dealing with the Chinese side, they were not completely defeated. This was because Xiao Liqing's people were very agile in dodging, and there was also a special team protecting the low-level and ordinary people of Haiqing. This team was naturally the people from sentient base. They relied on the instincts of zombies and their high levels. Therefore, they were able to easily dodge the bullets fired by the Chinese side. The Chinese side had been using new weapons and did not use their abilities to attack. Xiao Liqing knew that they were actually showing off how powerful the Chinese weapons were, allowing them to deal with their opponents without using their abilities. They wanted to use this to show how strong the Chinese army was. At the same time, they could use their weapons to exhaust the enemy's abilities. By the time their weapons were exhausted, the energy of the enemy's abilities would have been depleted. In this way, they would have a great chance of winning if they used their abilities to deal with the other party. Because even if it was just dodging and dodging, the ability user still needed to use their ability energy to operate. Just when Li Yuelong was feeling smug, thinking that it wouldn't be a problem for them to deal with the people from the other 3 bases combined, Xiao Liqing suddenly shouted to his surroundings, "Don't wait to watch the show. Come out and deal with them quickly so that you can report back." His shout startled the people of Huaxia. Li Yuelong immediately paused and looked around vigilantly. However, he didn't sense anything, so he thought that Xiao Liqing was bluffing. He snorted disdainfully. What's wrong? Who is he trying to scare? Let's see who you can really call out." However, at this moment, a huge fireball suddenly appeared from the side and smashed towards them. The energy contained in the fireball was very powerful, and it was a power that could only be created by a rank 7 arcanist. It was obvious that the person who suddenly threw the fireball was a rank 7 arcanist. I hate people like you who think you're infallible the most. You don't even understand the situation when you look down on others. A delicate and slightly hoarse voice was heard and a white figure flashed out. At the same time, the white figure was accompanied by a big black panther that was about 3 to 4 meters long. The black panther was like a black shadow, following beside the girl with 2 long ponytails that were as long as ribbons. The girl happened to be wearing a white dress, and the combination of black and white was very eye-catching. Boom! Before Li Yuelong and the others could see what was going on with the 2 people who had just appeared, the huge fireball suddenly spun at a high speed and exploded. The energy from the explosion of the fireball was suddenly released, and it immediately radiated in all directions. Then a strong wind blade quickly shot out from the location where the fireball exploded, shooting in all directions. At the same time, the people of Haiqing and even the people of Qingshan base seemed to have received a signal at the same time, and in an instant all of them flashed and retreated far away. By the time their enemies reacted, the fireball had already exploded. Because Haiqing and Qingshan base knew that Lin Qiao would send a group of people out in the next 2 days, they also guessed the actions of Huaxia. Thus he sent out 2 experts to assist him. Lin Kuei's pair of sharp eyes, like that of a black panther, looked at the people of Huaxiao very coldly. He did not forget what the people of Qingshan Base did to him after they captured him. So he only appeared beside Qiu Lily for a few seconds, and then suddenly disappeared on the spot. Soon in the next second he flashed behind a Huaxia arcanist. The other party had just noticed him but did not have time to react. Lin Kuei slapped down with his claws. Bang! Although the combat suits of these arcanists had some protection against the energy of arcanists, they still could not withstand this kind of physical attack. In particular, the strength of Lin Kuei's claws could smash a stone that weighed a few tons, and if it landed on their bodies, no matter how powerful the combat suits were, the bones in their bodies would be crushed. The person did not even have time to scream before he was slapped into the wall and stuck. While the person's body continued to stick to the wall, Lin Kuei had already rushed over again and bit off the person's neck. Then he casually spat and continued to attack the next person. Qiu Lily, on the other hand, chased after Li Yuelong and attacked him. Li Yuelong was only a level 6 arcanist. After being targeted by Qiu Lily, there was no way for him to escape. What made him even more desperate was that at this time, a group of people wearing camouflage combat uniforms suddenly appeared around him. The aura of these people was not lower than level 5 and they were all very strong arcanists. Originally, a few people from Huaxiao worked together to deal with a person from Haiqing or Qingshan Base. But suddenly, the group of people brought by the twin-tailed girl suddenly broke the balance. However, before he could see the fate of his people, he was hit by a bunch of fireballs from Qiu Lily. These fireballs not only contained fire, but a large number of wind blades and cones were also shot out. When he dodged the fireballs, he could not avoid the fire blades. So soon his body was cut by the wind blades, and then he was swept into Qiu Lily's fire tornado. Chapter 1356. With the addition of Qiu Lily and Lin Kuei, no matter how advanced the weapons of the Huaxia people were, they were slowly losing the ability to fight back. After getting rid of the Huaxia people, Qiu Lily and the others gathered together. If you guys want to gather information, please come back to the base with us, Qiu Lily said to Yi Yingyue as she looked at the people from the base. Yi Yingyue smiled and nodded. Yes, it's okay. We'll go with you. Thus everyone went to the base. How was it? Did you guys find the place? As soon as they got in the car, the three of them were immediately bombarded with questions. We found the place. It's more than 11,000 kilometers below the surface. There is indeed a very large space. Before we came up, we didn't have a rough estimate of its size, Li Jing replied casually. 10,000 kilometers below. You guys actually went so deep down. Is it dangerous? Xiao Liqing looked back at Li Jing curiously from the front passenger seat. Li Jing nodded. The air in that space is filled with poisonous energy. Normal people can't breathe normally, so they need to wear gas masks. However, our leader has a special helper who helped us solve a lot of problems. Helper? Xiao Liqing asked in confusion. Yes. Li Jing didn't say much about it. He just wanted to let him know that there was such a thing. Xiao Liqing also didn't ask much. He only asked about other things. What kind of space is it? Li Jing said. It's a very mysterious space. There are many plants growing underground that we have never seen or thought about. There was a layer of energy mist at the top of the space. Although the entire space was underground, it was covered in a layer of energy mist. Although the entire space is underground, it isn't completely dark. There is also a faint layer of light. Speaking of danger, there is indeed danger everywhere. Half of the plants we saw were aggressive mutated plants. Most of the mutated beasts down there are level 7 or 8 and they are very powerful. After hearing the information from Li Zhang and the other two level 1st kings, everyone had a preliminary understanding of the underground space. After returning to the base, Li Zhang and the other two wrote reports and drew all sorts of pictures. Then they reported what they saw underground to Lin Feng, Wu Qingyue and the others. I didn't expect that big cat to go down with Qiao Qiao. When she heard that Qiao Lin had a little helper, Qiu Lily immediately guessed that it was the big cat. I still don't understand why that big cat would follow her. After hearing Qiu Lily's words, Wu Qingyue, who had come with Tingting and Lingling, suddenly asked in confusion. Everyone present already knew that the big red cat liked to follow Lin Qiao around. Lin Feng thought for a while expressionlessly before suddenly saying, "The main thing is, why did our leader allow it to continue following us? Is it because it has never attacked humans before?" He felt that one of the reasons Lin Qiao had allowed the big cat to follow them was that the big cat from the underground was like a mutant and would not actively attack people. They weren't like the other underground creatures that would attack violently the moment they saw humans. However, Lin Feng believed that this was not the only reason why Lin Qiao asked it to follow him. Could it be that it was prepared for the situation she was in now? Hearing his words, the others exchanged glances with each other. However, they couldn't figure it out even after thinking for a while. As such, they turned their attention back to the underground space. There are actually level 7 and level 8 underworld creatures in this place. What if they suddenly come up one day? If they suddenly come up one day, it would be a huge problem. Looking at the current situation, Lin Feng was most worried that it would be troublesome if they discovered such a situation. That's not the most important thing. Based on the information and attitude given by your leader, according to the information and attitude your leader gave us, she is still investigating why these creatures came out. That means that there must be something even more troublesome than these level 7 and 8 underground beasts, Wu Qingyue said, looking at Lin Feng with a smile. Lin Feng looked at him. Indeed, but we can't rule out the possibility that I mentioned. But why are there so many level 7 and 8 underground creatures, but they haven't come out? Or could it be that they only sent these low-level ones to scout out the situation on the surface? Wu Qingyue looked at Li Zheng and asked, what does she mean by that? Lin Qiao didn't let him say too much about the level 9 creature. Li Zheng thought for a while and said, the leader didn't come to a conclusion, but she suspects that there's an extremely powerful level 9 controlling that space apart from these level 7 and 8 underground creatures. Wu Qingyue and the others turned to look at each other. Level 9? Is there really such a thing? Since there were so many level 8 beasts, it was normal for one of them to break through to level 9. However, after thinking about the characteristics of the underworld creatures, this level 9 creature should be unimaginably powerful. Li Zheng said, she's just suspecting. Before she can confirm its existence, she doesn't intend to let everyone know too much. But she also wants to remind everyone that it's best to be mentally prepared. Perhaps when the next batch comes out, the information will be more detailed. Lin Feng said, Huaxia didn't get the information they wanted this time. I reckon they'll definitely increase their forces to guard that place next time. Especially when our people came out, but their people are nowhere to be seen. Xikong Qin will definitely want to know what happened to his people down there. Then he'll know that his plan failed again. Seems like Xikong Qin is going to be very angry, Wu Qingyue said with a smile. Lin Feng asked him, is there any progress on Huaxia's side? Wu Qingyue shook his head. I don't know what his big moves are, but only some small ones. Lin Feng nodded. Recently, the underground creatures in various regions seem to be gathering together. I feel like something is going to happen. Almar, who had been silent all this while, suddenly said, could it be related to the situation underground again? Perhaps, but the main thing now is to find out what they are gathering together for, Wu Qingyue said. I hope the people we sent over can bring back some useful information, Almar said with a sigh. She felt that there were too many things going on recently. After dealing with the annoying fellows in Huaxiao, she received news that the underground creatures in various regions were gathering on a large scale. She didn't know what was going on. Chapter 1357. At this time, the underground beasts in various areas were gathering, and several types of underground creatures were biting and devouring each other. In fact, these underground beasts generally had a large appetite, and it wasn't just the level 9 beast in the underground space that had a large appetite. The low-level ones on the surface could also eat a lot of food and energy. At this time, they were all attacking each other like crazy because they were of different species. They only attacked other species, either biting each other to death or being bitten to death. And the strange thing was that they would only bite their prey to death, and the other beasts would not come over to attack them. At the edge of the chaotic battlefield stood a powerful level 7 to 8 subterranean exotic beast. They each guarded one side, quietly watching the group of underground beasts fighting in front of them. There were also their own kind among them. But they were not moved, and all of them stared quietly at that place, observing. The underground beasts of the same level were all biting each other, and after biting their opponents to death, they immediately tore each other's flesh on the spot and ate all of it. After eating the leftovers, they immediately began to look for the next beast that had no opponents and began to attack each other. They didn't have any abilities, although they relied on brute force to attack. But their flesh and blood were full of energy, and there was also an energy core in their brains. After killing their opponents, these underground beasts would immediately dig out their opponents' energy cores and swallow them, then start to eat their flesh. All these underground creatures did the same thing: kill their opponents, eat them, then continue to find opponents to kill and eat. This was a scene of mutual killing. A kilometer away, a group of people were hiding and observing the situation with long-range binoculars. After seeing the large area filled with killing each other, they couldn't help but reveal puzzled expressions. What's going on? Are they killing each other? Qian Xiaoai held the binoculars and observed for a while, then continued to observe while asking. Li Yueshan, who came with Haiqing, stood next to him and also held the binoculars in his hand. He said thoughtfully, "I feel like they are advancing. Look at those that have eaten their opponents. Their auras are rapidly strengthening." It was no wonder that these underground creatures had eaten a lot of things on the surface. Whether it was the energy cores of humans, mutated beasts, or mutated plants, there had been no signs of evolution. So they need to eat their own kind? Qian Xiaoai put down the binoculars and turned to look at him. "Is that so? You actually managed to observe their advancement?" Li Yueshan nodded. "Yes, we have done a special investigation and a long-term follow-up investigation. Although these things have been eating, they have not shown any signs of advancement." Qian Xiaoai raised her hand and touched her bald head, revealing a thoughtful expression. After thinking for a while, she said, "If it's really like what you've observed, then are they gathering together now to level up? In order to level up, we have to absorb the energy of the same kind that came out from underground. This method of leveling up is a little too..." He paused for a moment. "Is it cruel?" It was a little, but if that was the only way, then there was really no other way. After all, their existence doesn't conform to the laws of nature. Li Yueshan continued his words. In addition to the two of them, there were some other people standing beside them. This time, it was not only the representatives of the base who had come to observe the abnormal situation of the underground creatures. Several members of the corpse hunting group had also come to collect information. The March Corpse Hunting Group was led by Luo Yuanjun. He was a curious person, so he was in charge of collecting information in the group. As a corpse hunting group that had a close cooperation with the base, Luo Yuanjun did not avoid the people of the base. He even formed a team with them. At this time, he stood beside Qian Xiaoai and observed the situation in front of them. After hearing the conversation between Qian Xiaoai and Li Yueshan, he also revealed a look of understanding. However, what was the purpose of those high-grade subterranean exotic beasts guarding the surroundings? They were all guarding the periphery of the promotion field. What did they want? Because the scale of the underground creatures gathering here was very large. There were at least 100,000 underground creatures gathered here. In order to level up as soon as possible, the high-level creatures would fight with those of the same level. It would be a waste of time if they fought with those of a lower level. However, it would take a lot of strength to kill an opponent of the same level as them. Right at this moment, a victor finally emerged from the first batch of level 6 exotic beasts that were fighting. An underground exotic beast covered in wounds stood in front of another dead level 6 underground exotic beast, raising its head high. It was a top-tier level 6 exotic beast that was about to advance into level 7. After biting its opponent to death, it raised its head and opened its bloody mouth, letting out a loud roar. Then it lowered its head and started devouring its opponent's flesh and blood. Like all the other underground beasts, it had a huge appetite and ate very quickly. Even if the surrounding subterranean beasts passed by it, they wouldn't attack it. After this level 6 exotic beast quickly finished eating its opponent's corpse, it even chewed up the bones and swallowed them. After it finished eating, it suddenly bent its limbs, lowered its body and lowered its head. It straightened its neck and let out a low roar. Roar, look, that one looks like it's about to advance. Luo Yuanjun was the first to notice the situation of the level 6 underground beast. He immediately spoke up subconsciously. After taking a closer look, the strongest of the underground beasts that were fighting each other were no higher than level 6. The level 7 exotic beasts were standing at the edge of the battlefield, watching them silently. Hearing Luo Yuanjun's words, the others looked over curiously. "Where is it?" Luo Yuanjun said, "The west side." Then everyone turned their gazes in that direction and started searching. As expected, it didn't take long before they saw a level 6 underground beast that was behaving strangely. The exotic beast was lowering its body, baring its fangs and roaring in a low voice. After roaring for a while, it started trembling all over, and the trembling became more and more intense. A wave of energy was emitted from its body, spreading around it. The surrounding underworld creatures were forced to retreat. The surrounding underground beasts were forced to scatter. After pulling away to a certain distance, they started fighting again. The situation of this level 6 underground beast immediately attracted the attention of the surrounding high-level underground beasts. Chapter 1358. The level 8 and 7 subterranean exotic beasts on the outskirts were all staring at the mutated level 6 subterranean exotic beast. At the same time, their auras were also undergoing minute changes. If they were said to be calm and there weren't any abnormalities earlier, they were now retracting their auras and concealing themselves. If ordinary beasts or humans purposely retracted their auras and hid their existence, they were either preparing to hunt or preparing to do something else. However, they didn't make a move immediately. It seemed like they were waiting for something. The other high-grade subterranean exotic beasts are retracting their auras. They are preparing to make a move. The spectators from afar also noticed the changes in the high-grade exotic beasts. But they seem to be waiting for an opportunity. What are they waiting for? Are they waiting for the result of the advancing level 6 exotic beasts advancement? Perhaps that's the case. Perhaps there's something else going on. Everyone started guessing the various possibilities regarding this situation. While the humans at the base were observing the situation, the high-grade subterranean exotic beasts were watching the exotic beasts slaughtering each other, seemingly waiting for an opportunity to appear. Qian Xiaoai and the others vaguely felt that there wouldn't be any sudden development so soon, but they were sure something special would appear later on. Sure enough, they waited for 3 to 4 days. Before the first subterranean exotic beast succeeded in advancing to level 6, other exotic beasts appeared. Their levels varied, ranging from level 6 to level 3 or 4 and so on. The high-grade subterranean exotic beasts were finally no longer watching quietly from the sidelines, because they were starting to take action. For example, a level 4 subterranean exotic beast was in the process of advancing, and a level 5 subterranean exotic beast suddenly appeared from the side to attack it. At that moment, one of the level 7 and 8 exotic beasts watching from the outskirts suddenly leaped down, instantly pouncing at the level 5 subterranean exotic beast that was preparing to ambush it. The moment the level 5 exotic beast made its move, it attracted the attention of the other high-grade subterranean exotic beasts. As such, with a difference of 2 levels, the speed, strength, and precise reactions of a level 7 subterranean exotic beast were much stronger than a level 5 subterranean exotic beast. Before the level 5 ambush could succeed, the high-tier subterranean exotic beast pounced on him and pressed him under its claws, biting him to death before he could react. Just like that, the level 7 subterranean exotic beast that was bitten to death didn't eat it. Instead, it left it there and turned to leave. Very soon, this level 5 subterranean exotic beast would be picked up by the other exotic beasts that had no opponents yet and eaten it. From this, it could be seen that the high-grade subterranean exotic beasts seemed to be doing their job of maintaining order. Of course, they probably didn't just come here for this. There might be other things. While the humans were guessing the intentions of the high-level underworld creatures, a level advancement creature finally appeared. That piece of land was already covered in desolation and had been destroyed to the point of being in a complete mess. The thick smell of blood permeated the air, and the roars of the beasts were still noisy and crisscrossed. The one that had advanced wasn't the first level 6 subterranean exotic beast, but a level 5. It successfully advanced to level 6. Its aura suddenly grew stronger, and its body began to stretch and grow larger amidst a wave of cracking sounds. Soon, it entered the ranks of the level 6 subterranean exotic beast. However, it didn't continue to join in the slaughter. Instead, it turned around and quickly left the area. The high-grade exotic beasts didn't stop it either and left with it. However, after the other level 5 subterranean exotic beast failed to advance, its aura turned chaotic and it couldn't control itself. Following that, the energy in its body began to contract and expand, contracting and expanding. This meant that its advancement had failed. What would happen next was an energy explosion followed by death. The energy explosion wouldn't blow up their entire bodies, but it would deform them a little. After this level 5 subterranean exotic beast failed to advance, the surrounding level 5 and 6 subterranean exotic beasts that had been waiting for an opportunity immediately rushed up. Another round of chaos couldn't be avoided no matter who came first. However, such a situation was allowed. The high-grade subterranean exotic beasts wouldn't appear to stop them. However, when a level 6 subterranean creature failed to advance, the surrounding subterranean creatures didn't dare to rush up to snatch it. In any case, they wouldn't be able to snatch it even if they rushed up, because there would be a level 7 subterranean exotic beast faster than them. The surrounding level 7 subterranean exotic beasts seemed to be waiting for this moment, while the level 8 subterranean exotic beasts didn't make a move. However, there weren't many level 8 subterranean exotic beasts here, only a tenth of the level 7 subterranean exotic beasts. The level 6 subterranean exotic beasts that successfully advanced to level 7 didn't leave like the level 5 subterranean exotic beasts that advanced to level 6. They would flash to the edge of the battlefield and continue watching. Doesn't that mean they can only advance to level 7 at most? Don't these level 7 subterranean exotic beasts advance using the same method as the others? Luo Yuanjun asked doubtfully after watching for a few days. Maybe level 7 is a special level and it'll change to another method to advance. But this method is definitely the same as killing each other. After all, even if they eat a level 7 or 8 mutated beast on the surface, they won't advance, Li Yueshan said from the side. Is this considered internal consumption? I thought these things had no natural enemies and would continue wreaking havoc on Earth's surface like this. In less than 10 years, the entire Earth will become a dead planet. Qianshao AI said with some emotion. Although their base in Haiqing had recently been researching a type of herb that was very effective against these subterranean creatures, with the number of these darn things, even if humans had an effective herb against them, it would take decades to eliminate all of them. After a few decades, who knew how many mutated plants, mutated beasts, zombies, and so on would be left on Earth? After considering the future of the entire Earth, the appearance of these things was even more terrifying than the zombies that not only ate humans but also their own kind. After all, zombies only ate humans, they wouldn't eat plants. If even plants were gone, then the various food chains on Earth would only enter a broken state. If this continued for a long time, wouldn't Earth really be finished? Chapter 1359. Even in the apocalypse, the laws of nature haven't changed. Li Yueshan nodded. I wonder when this promotion battle will end, Luo Yuanjun muttered to himself as he picked up his binoculars and began observing the battlefield through his binoculars. After a few days of killing, some of them managed to level up after eating the flesh of several underground exotic beasts. Some of them killed others and were bitten to death by others. There were also some who were lucky enough to level up after eating just one. Therefore, the number of subterranean exotic beasts had obviously decreased by more than half. Some of them died while the ones that failed to advance also died. Only those that succeeded were able to leave. The remaining ones continued to kill, either dying or advancing. With such a method of death, there wouldn't be many left alive. Aren't they afraid that their own kind will become fewer and become extinct? Qianshao AI couldn't help but ask. Their reproduction speed isn't considered slow. In fact, it's considered very fast. It's just that their level is relatively slow. Also, look, the lowest level here is only level 3. There aren't any that are below level 3. Therefore, these subterranean exotic beasts are still holding back. Li Yueshan answered Qianshao AI's question. Qianshao AI nodded. If that's the case, they are indeed holding back a way out. Li Yueshan said, we should also send the news back. But no matter what, this situation is considered good news for us. At least with them gathered together, we might be able to catch them all in one fell swoop. Then they sent people back to the base with the information they had seen in the past few days. After reading the information, Lin Feng, Wu Qingyue, and the others revealed complicated expressions. Although their advancement method is very costly, it's very efficient. Moreover, their level is getting higher and higher. There are already so many level 8 exotic beasts here, and there are still a bunch of level 8 exotic beasts underground. If one or two of these level 8 exotic beasts attack our base, we won't be able to defend at all. Lin Feng frowned slightly and thought for a while before sighing. The others also nodded in agreement with slightly gloomy faces. I just don't know how often this kind of advancement scene will happen. Qin Yuding stared at the information and said. Just as they were having a meeting in the conference room, there was a sudden rush of footsteps outside the door. Li Jing took a piece of paper and walked to the door. He looked at the leaders in the room and knocked lightly on the door. An urgent report from Huaxia. Everyone immediately turned to look at him. Urgent report? Lin Feng's expression turned serious. That's right. Otherwise, Li Jing wouldn't have knocked on the door while the meeting was still in progress. What's going on? What did China do? Wu Qiyue asked. Li Jing walked in with the information in his hands. As he walked, he said, he blew up the nearest gathering point of the underground beasts from Huaxia with a missile. Not only that, this missile contains a special substance, causing the subterranean exotic beasts around it to all die. He's dead. Everyone immediately showed a surprised expression. Even missiles wouldn't be able to kill them all so easily. Moreover, there were also level 7 and 8 subterranean beasts nearby. They definitely wouldn't die. Just their defense alone was already very strong. Even if the missiles could kill them, they would only be able to kill the low-level ones that were closest to the explosion zone. Those at level 5 and above would probably be fine. But Li Jing said that they were all dead. And there was another important factor. There was a special substance in the missile. Li Jing nodded with a serious expression and said, I've confirmed it again and again. Other than the higher-level ones at the periphery that ran away, the ones in the center are all dead. It doesn't seem like they were killed by the explosion. Seems like they were poisoned to death. That's because after the missile exploded, a substance in the form of a mist was released. Back then, Huaxia fired dozens of these missiles and blew up the entire group of exotic beasts. Dozens of missiles? Huaxia already had a way to deal with these subterranean creatures, but they still had to gather all the bases to discuss it. It seems like Xikongchen had planned this. The smile on Wu Qingyue's face disappeared. He narrowed his eyes expressionlessly. They had already created dozens of missiles. It was obvious that they had a research plan a long time ago. In the end, they still gathered the leaders of all the bases in the name of dealing with the subterranean creatures. Xikongchen's motive for doing this was definitely not simple. The other party had hidden this secret very well. They had never heard anything about it before. Now that they had suddenly released it, Huaxia was indeed starting to expose their ambitions. I think he must have done something secretly when he gathered the leaders of all the bases to Huaxia. However, when Qing Shan suggested going underground, he must have guessed that either you or our leader would go down, so he changed the plan. That's why they changed the proposal, Lin Feng said with a straight face. Even if Xikongchen changed the plan, he still hadn't stopped his actions. Who would have thought that they would suddenly make such a big move now? What does he mean by revealing his trump card now? Almar and the others who had been listening at the side asked in puzzlement. Wu Qingyue said, the underworld creatures are the most dangerous. Since they have such an effective weapon, they should be able to deal with them. Since they have such an effective weapon, the survival of mankind will be in their hands again. When that time comes, we only have two choices. When facing those creatures, should we deal with them ourselves or choose to use their weapons? As soon as he said this, everyone understood. If they dealt with them themselves, they wouldn't have such an effective weapon. They would only suffer heavy losses. If they wanted to use their weapons, the condition would be for them to do it. They had to agree to whatever the other party wanted. Moreover, the timing was very good. It was when the subterranean creatures were gathering. Killing a large number of them at once would not only be obvious, but it would also shock others. Almar's delicate face darkened when she heard that. Does Xikongchen really think that they are the only ones who can deal with these subterranean creatures? But speaking of which, they actually found something to deal with those subterranean creatures. Do you know what it is? Li Jing shook his head. Although we have collected some of this substance and handed it over to Lung Xuantong's research center for them to research, we didn't know what it was. As for what it is, it depends on the research center's progress. But I still feel that Huaxia discovered this too early. These subterranean creatures haven't been around for a long time, but we don't know when they started creating missiles. Chapter 1360. With this kind of weapon, they want all the bases to submit to them. Only by submitting to them can they obtain their protection. Wu Qingyue's lips curled into a smile, but there wasn't a trace of a smile in his eyes. I don't think it's that simple. Since they only want all the bases to submit to them, they could have revealed it earlier. There's no need to wait until now. Lin Kuei, who was relatively quiet, spoke up. Everyone looked at him. Wu Qingyue and Lin Feng lowered their eyes slightly, revealing a thoughtful expression. Qiu Lily stood by the window and looked back at them in confusion. What else does he want to do? The others looked at each other, unable to guess what Sikong Chen wanted to do. Lin Xiao, who was in the underground space, watched the level 9 subterranean exotic beast return to its nest. She then left quietly and circled back to the spatial entrance. Duan Wan and the others waited for the commotion caused by the level 9 exotic beast to gradually calm down from the cave entrance, before they all heaved a sigh of relief. After the level 9 exotic beast's torment, the underground space became even quieter. After Lin Xiao returned successfully, she saw that everyone was present and said, "It went back to rest after eating its fill. But with its appetite, it's a miracle that it hasn't gone extinct in this underground space." The others didn't go near because the level 9 exotic beast's aura was too strong. They weren't too clear about its hunting from afar. When they saw Lin Xiao return, they all looked at her curiously and expectantly. "How much did it eat this time?" Lin Xiao replied, 12, all of them level 8. After it finished eating, it caught another one and brought it back to its nest for a sumptuous meal. When everyone heard this, they all revealed a shocked expression. 12 of them, and all of them were level 8. Level 8 exotic beasts were so rare on the surface. Why were they so worthless in this underground space? Lin Xiao was right. It ate so much in one meal. How long does it need to eat? Hasn't it finished yet? It really can eat. It's exactly the same as the ones above. What should we do next? Continue to keep an eye on it? Kong Qingming sighed and asked Lin Xiao. Their mission was to scout out the situation, even though their main mission was to figure out why the underworld creatures had appeared. Now that they had come down and found the nest of those things, they also had a preliminary answer to the appearance of those things on the surface. The answer was naturally that those on the ground had been driven out by this rank 9 fellow. However, it was still unclear why this level 9 exotic beast was chasing those low-level exotic beasts away. But it seemed that they wouldn't know the answer in a short period of time, unless they stayed here to observe it for a long time. Lin Xiao thought about it. It was fine for her to continue staying here. However, this level 9 exotic beast obviously wouldn't climb to the surface so quickly. So if she stayed behind, it would surely take a long time. However, she couldn't spend all her time here since she had already figured out the situation here. In that case, he'd let the others stay behind and observe from afar. As long as they didn't get too close to the level 9 exotic beast, it wouldn't take a fancy to them. Xiadong, I'll leave the 2 ND division's men behind for you. You guys continue observing this level 9 exotic beast from afar and see when it will come out to hunt again. I'll bring the others back to the surface first. You guys act according to the situation. If it's safe, continue to observe. If it's not safe, quickly retreat. Lin Xiao looked at Xiadong and ordered. The zombies she brought from the second base's army also had wind element zombies. There were 1 and 2 others following Xiadong. If she asked them to fly up with just one person, they should be able to do it. Therefore, Lin Xiao didn't plan to leave too many people behind. She only left Xiadong, who was a level 7 and level 2 king, and 4 level 1 kings. Xiadong's wind element subordinate was only a level 5 king. Yes. Xiadong and the other members of the zombie army that Lin Xiao pointed out nodded and responded. What are your plans? She looked at Qingshan base's Lei Qing and Ocean City's Kong Qingming and the others. Lei Qing and Kong Qingming looked at each other. Let's go back and report the situation first. We'll wait for the higher-ups to decide. Kong Qingming frowned and said. Lei Qing glanced at him, then turned to Lin Xiao and nodded. Me too. Lin Xiao glanced at the 2 of them and said, Okay, since you guys want to go up, it's not good to leave too many people here. Xiadong and the others should stay behind and observe that fellow's movements. Anyway, if that level 9 big guy came out to hunt again, it wouldn't be small. Therefore, as long as they observed from afar, they would be able to know the general situation. If they didn't get close with Xiadong and the others' status as zombies, their lives wouldn't be in danger. Lin Xiao looked back at the direction of the level 9 beast, then threw everyone except Xiadong and the others into the space. Then she walked out of the cave and shouted, Come out, it's time to go back. Arf woof. A dog's bark came from the forest in front of them. Then they heard a whistling sound in the air. Wang Dahe and the others also came out and ran in front of Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao threw the three of them into the space one by one, then looked left and right but didn't see De Hong. After looking for a while, Lin Xiao didn't see De Hong's figure, so she didn't care about it. This guy always came and went without a trace, so she couldn't see it now. Maybe it would follow them in a while. Lin Xiao didn't care about it anymore. He brought the others back to the cave they came from. In the space, Yuan Tianqing saw a large group of people being sent into the space by Lin Xiao. He couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong? What's the situation now?" He had seen Lin Xiao's strange situation before, but he knew it wasn't the time to ask about it. He saw that Lin Xiao recovered on her own, but he still had to ask her what was going on when he went back. "We've seen the general situation. Now we need to go back and report the situation to the higher-ups, then wait for the higher-ups' decision. But we still left some people here to continue observing." Kong Qingming explained to him. Yuan Tianqing nodded and didn't say anything else. After Lin Xiao went up, it didn't take long for a red figure to rush over. It jumped up and also jumped out. Lin Xiao felt that not only did she have to deal with these underground creatures, but she also had to deal with the people in the Huaxiao base as soon as possible. Before the problem with her body flared up, she had to get rid of the biggest threat in Huaxiao. This way, even if something happened to her and she temporarily left the base, Lin Feng would still be able to deal with other things. Even if Lin Feng couldn't deal with it, Wu Qingyue wouldn't just watch from the side. Chapter 1361. When Lin Xiao brought his people back to the surface, Xikong Chen from Huaxiao once again went to the secret research base outside the base. The group of people that came up this time ran back, but there's no news from our people at all. We don't know what's going on with your daughter, but I think if she's really like what you said, it must have something to do with that woman at the universal base. Xikong Chen sat on the sofa in Professor Bai's office, leaned against the back of the sofa and looked up at Professor Bai. Professor Bai's face was full of wrinkles, and now he seemed to be a little older than before. His back was also a little more stiff, and his entire aura seemed to have quietened down. Hearing Xikong Chen's words, he sat motionlessly at the desk. He silently looked at Xie Longyun's photo on the table in front of him and didn't make a sound. Xikong Chen looked at him and also became silent. After a moment of silence, Professor Bai finally said with his face down, "You seem to be doing things less and less like before. What's going on?" As soon as he said this, Xikong Chen's eyes darkened. His expression also darkened and he immediately replied, "Professor Bai, don't you know my ability? It's just that the universal base is really difficult to deal with now, and it's not because of me. I'm already thinking of a way, and I'll definitely figure out their background before our operation really starts. Trust me." In the end, he sat up straight and looked at Professor Bai with a firm gaze. Professor Bai didn't look at him and still looked at the photo on the table without moving. A few seconds after Xikong Chen finished speaking, he said indifferently, "It's because I believe in your ability that I'm working with you. If your ability isn't as good as before, it's not a good thing for me. At least I'm not going to change partners at this time." Xikong Chen looked at him seriously. "Don't worry, I won't give you the chance to change partners." At this time in the universal base, outside the office of the medical center's director, Qing Wangxue walked over with Lin Xiaolu carrying a lunchbox. At the same time, a female nurse walked over from the other side. When she saw Qing Wangxue, she immediately showed a happy expression. "Sai, sister-in-law Qing is here to deliver food to brother again. You have to quickly find a wife for our director so that she can deliver food. Don't you think it's too tiring to always trouble you?" The female nurse approached Qing Wangxue and joked with her. Lin Hao was indeed very troublesome. He was a bachelor and had no time to cook. It was impossible for him to have time to cook even if he stayed in the medical center all day. Often he would go to Lin Feng's place to have a meal when he got off work. If he didn't get off work, he would starve. When they were busy until late at night, they would skip eating until the next day. In any case, the bodies of adepts were much better than those of ordinary people. Even if they did not eat, the energy in their bodies would be self-sufficient to supply some of the nutrients they needed. Of course, he couldn't go without food for a long time. Not only would his digestive system crash, but his mouth would also become bland. Although energy could provide some nutrients to the body, the feeling of hunger could not disappear. This was also very torturous. So sometimes, for the sake of their families, Qing Wangxue and Lin Wenwen would take turns to deliver food to Lin Hao. Hearing the nurse's words, Qing Wangxue only laughed heartily. "No, it's not hard at all. But you're right, we really need to find a wife for Lin Hao. It's just that he didn't take a fancy to one himself. We are also very anxious. This nurse was Lin Hao's assistant. She would often see Qing Wangxue and Lin Wenwen come over, so she became familiar with them. The female nurse, Lu Meiqing, held a few medical documents in her hand while opening the door to Lin Hao's office. She pushed it open and let Qing Wangxue enter first while she stood by the side. After the two of them entered, Lu Meiqing followed them in. There was no one in the office. When Qing Wangxue saw this, she said, "Is he busy again?" After Qing Wangxue brought Lin Xiaolu in, she placed the lunch box in her hand directly on Lin Hao's desk. Lin Xiaolu obediently walked to the chair on the side and sat down. Lu Meiqing also placed the documents in her hand on other places on Lin Hao's desk and helped to tidy up Lin Hao's desk. While tidying up, she smiled and replied, "Yes, he is examining the patient. I'm afraid he will only be back a little later. Are you going to wait for him to eat before going back? Or are you going to put the food in?" Qing Wangxue smiled at her and said, "I don't have time to wait for him. I still have to go back. Just leave the food here. When he comes back from work and sees it, he will naturally eat it himself. Anyway, he will know that I brought it." Lu Meiqing nodded. "That's true." After saying that, she secretly glanced at the food for Lin Hao and then asked Qing Wangxue without batting an eyelid, "You have been quite busy recently. 2 days ago it was Miss Wenwen who came to deliver food to the director, right?" Qing Wangxue smiled and nodded at her. "Indeed, a little. You guys have been delivering food to the director all the time. It has become a habit for him. Aren't you afraid that he will stay here and not go home?" After Lu Meiqing finished tidying up Lin Hao's desk, she stopped what she was doing and pretended to ask her casually. Qing Wangxue gently shook her head. "That won't happen. He is a person who knows his limits. He will still go back when it is time." Lu Meiqing's eyes darkened when she heard what she said. She quickly turned her head to hide her eyes, afraid that Qing Wangxue would see it. Because she didn't get the information she wanted to know, she continued to say unwillingly, "Our director is a workaholic. When he goes home he brings a pile of materials back to read." She said this because she didn't know whether Lin Hao would bring the materials home or not. That was why she said this, wanting to continue to get information from Qing Wangxue. Although she was Lin Hao's assistant, there were still many things that Lin Hao didn't tell her. Even if she came here herself and searched, she also didn't find it. Of course, she didn't dare to get information from Lin Hao, but she had some confidence in getting information from Qing Wangxue. She just didn't expect that Qing Wangxue was not as easy to deal with as she thought. Qing Wangxue smiled and said, "I'm not sure about that. Well, the food has been delivered. We will go back first. So let's go." Lin Xiaolu immediately turned her head to look at her, then stood up from the chair and walked towards her mother. However, when she raised her hand to hold Qing Wangshue's hand, she casually glanced at Lu Meiqing. There was a hint of indecipherable meaning flashing in those pure eyes. Lu Meiqing didn't notice Lin Xiaolu's gaze. Seeing that Qing Wangxue said that she was leaving in order not to arouse suspicion, she quickly said that it was time to go out. He should have a lot of companions. When Lin Feng heard this, he stopped in his tracks. He looked at Qing Wangxue blankly and then became serious. "Are you sure?" Qing Wangxue glared at him and said to him, "You don't believe what your daughter said?" Lin Feng walked to the sofa and sat down. "Tell me what's going on." Qing Wangxue sat on the single sofa and said to him, "When I went to Lin Hao's office today, that female nurse also happened to appear. She went into the office with me and casually chatted with me. However, she didn't say much and quickly left Lin Hao's office with me. But after we came out, Xiaolu told me that what the female nurse said and what she was thinking didn't match. She seemed to be casually chatting with me, but in her heart she was trying to trick me to find out where Lin Hao kept the leader's information. No wonder the nurse said that Lin Hao would take the information home after work. Actually, she didn't know if Lin Hao would take the information home, so she said that to test me. If I said yes or no, then it would be equivalent to giving her an answer. Luckily, what she said was a bit vague." Hearing that, Lin Feng's face also darkened. He said, "Is she still testing you?" The other party actually needed to test Lin Hao's information from other people. That meant that even if she was by Lin Hao's side, Lin Hao didn't believe her, so she couldn't get any useful clues from Lin Hao. It looked like her undercover work didn't have any progress. And seeing that she changed her method of finding information, it should be because the person behind her was anxious and wanted her to get clues as soon as possible. It looked like Huaxia had already made a move on many aspects, and the other party was probably going to make some big moves in the near future. After all, she had already used the weapons to deal with the underground creatures. She was indeed testing me. I didn't miss anything. How are you going to deal with this? Tell Lin Hao first. Qing Wangxue looked at her and asked. Lin Feng frowned and thought for a bit, then said, of course I have to tell Lin Hao about this. As for how to deal with it, don't beat the grass and scare the snake. I want to find out the group behind her. Qing Wangxue asked. But Lin Hao hasn't come back these few days. How are we going to inform him? The next time we deliver food to him? Lin Feng nodded and said, just send the information like usual. I'll send someone to secretly keep an eye on the female nurse. Okay, don't worry about other things, leave it to me. Qing Wangxue nodded to show that she understood. Okay, I understand. Chapter 1363. The next day when Lin Hao returned to the office at noon, Lu Meiqing followed him in. Sister-in-law Qing is here to deliver food to the director again. As soon as she entered, she saw Qing Wangxue standing in front of Lin Hao's desk. There was another lunchbox on the table. It was probably a new lunch for Lin Hao. Lin Hao nodded when he saw Qing Wangxue and casually greeted, sister-in-law. Then he looked around and asked, huh? You didn't bring Xiaolu today? She must have brought her last night. Qing Wangxue turned to see the two of them come in, then retreated to the side to clean up Lin Hao's lunchbox. As she cleaned up, she replied with a smile, no, she went to play with her friends today. That's why I didn't bring her. Lin Xiaolu's friends were naturally Tong Tong, Lingling and Tingting. Lin Hao just remembered that Lingling and Tingting were in High City a few days ago. He hadn't seen Xiaolu for a while. Now that Wu Qingyue brought the two kids over, she naturally had to go play with them. Oh, I see. Qing Wangxue smiled and nodded at Lu Meiqing. Hey, I just got here. If you're not busy now, you can eat while it's hot. I'll go back first. As she spoke, she pushed the lunchbox she had just brought closer to its position. Lin Hao sat in his seat and nodded. He placed the things in his hands on the side of the table and said, okay, I got it. Qing Wangxue took the lunchbox and left. Qing Wangxue took the lunchbox he had eaten and left the place. Director, you should at least go back and eat by yourself. Why do you always have to let your family bring it over? Lu Meiqing was still holding the documents in her hand. When she walked towards the filing cabinet, she casually said to Lin Hao. Lin Hao shrugged and reached out to pull the lunchbox that Qing Wangxue had just brought to him. As he opened it, he said, do you think I have time? It's so troublesome to come back immediately after going back for a meal. Actually, I already told them that it's okay to eat at the cafeteria, but they just want to bring me food. What can I do? He didn't feel hungry when he was busy with work, but now that he saw the lunchbox in front of him and smelled the hot food, his stomach immediately protested. Hungry. I want to eat. It was time to eat. As he opened the lunchbox, he was slightly startled when he saw a certain spot in the box, but his hands didn't stop moving. After smoothly opening the lids, he made an action of sniffing the aroma of the food. But sister-in-law's cooking is indeed better than the chef's in our canteen. Smells so good. After Lu Meiqing put down the files, she turned around and saw that he had already opened his lunchbox to eat. Knowing that he couldn't disturb their director's mealtime, he smiled and said, that's true. Of course, my own cooking is much better than the cooks in the cafeteria who just want to deal with it. Sigh, but for me, no matter how bad the food in the cafeteria is, as long as it can fill my stomach, it's fine. After all, she was just an ordinary person. If it wasn't for the fact that she had a job in the medical center, she wouldn't have survived. She didn't know where her next meal would come from after she ate her last one. With that, she also left Lin Hao's office. After watching her go out and help close the door, Lin Hao then took out the food box on the top. Looking at the bottom layer of rice, he took out the bottom layer of rice and put it aside. Only then did he see the piece of paper at the bottom, which was for him. After he opened the lunchbox just now, he saw a small red dot on the side of the lunchbox. This dot usually didn't appear, and it only appeared when a message was sent. And its appearance meant that this was a message that needed to be kept secret. So he deliberately pretended to eat so that Lu Meiqing would realize that he needed a private space to eat. Sure enough, Lu Meiqing tactfully went out. Only then did Lin Hao feel at ease to read the secret message that Qing Wangxue brought him. Taking out the note and opening it, Lin Shi raised his eyebrows. His expression didn't change much, but he meaningfully glanced outside the door. Looking at the note, he was reminded to make sure that Lin Qiao's identity information was kept secret. Don't let people deliberately come in and search for this information, then things would be over. Lin Hao wasn't surprised by this. After all, Lin Qiao was the leader of a base and it was normal for many people to want to know her secrets. In particular, her body had died once. Lin Hao was glad that the 3 people who had seen Lu Tianyu die were no longer in this world. He was also mentally prepared that there were spies in the base. After all, even if this base was small now, there were already 20,000 people. And those who came before were from several other bases. It was normal for some people to be dissatisfied with Lin Qiao, who was now using Lu Tianyu's identity as the leader. So he had been doing a good job of keeping the information of Lin Qiao's previous physical examination in secret. If it weren't for the use of her information for research, he would have burned all the information. But thinking about the group of zombies at the second base, if one day there was another pregnant one, at least there was a case to refer to here. But when he saw that the person who wanted to inquire about his information was Lu Meiqing, who had been working beside him for a few months, Lin Hao just curled his lips. It wasn't that he had long suspected Lu Meiqing, but that he didn't trust anyone at all. Looking at the later part of Lin Feng's instructions, he still needed to find out the team behind Lu Meiqing and told him not to show it. Lin Hao burned the note and then officially began to eat his meal. Outside, when Lu Meiqing came out of Lin Hao's office, her expression immediately became worried. She walked back to her own duty room and sat down. She frowned and thought about how to find out Lin Hao's secret recently. But Lin Hao's defenses were really too tight. It was as if an invisible shield had appeared around him, hiding all his secrets. She had been circling around him for a few months, but she couldn't find a breakthrough at all. And recently, their organization had begun to become anxious because China had already revealed their secret. In other words, China's secret operation that had been secretly plotting was about to officially begin. At this time, if they still couldn't get any valuable information, then it might be too late. They always felt that the situation would change. So they began to think of other ways to find a breakthrough. Since they couldn't find a breakthrough from Lin Hao himself, then they would find it from the people around him. So recently, every time Qing Wangxue and Lin Wenwen came over, she would pretend to meet them and say a few words to get familiar with them first. Chapter 1364. Lu Meiqing's plan from the beginning was very beautiful. She wanted to say that if she could get close to Lin Hao, she would be able to slowly find some useful clues. Unexpectedly, even after staying by Lin Hao's side for a few months, she still couldn't find anything. She knew that Lin Hao would be on guard, but she didn't expect that the other party would be so thorough that she couldn't find anything. Originally, she planned to find out more slowly, but the current situation didn't allow her to spend more time. Therefore, she wanted to start with Lin Hao's sister or sister-in-law. But it turned out that these 2 women weren't simple people. After work in the evening, Lu Meiqing didn't go home but went directly to the organization. She didn't realize that she had aroused the suspicion of the target, so she didn't know that she had been targeted. After arriving at the place where the organization was located, she looked around and saw that there were no suspicious people before she walked into the community. She went to a building and knocked rhythmically in front of a family's door. Soon someone opened the door. When the person inside opened the door, he looked alert. When he saw that it was her, he relaxed and immediately opened the door to let her in. After she entered the house, she walked directly through the living room and walked into one of the rooms. "How is it? Is there any good news?" Seeing her come in, the people sitting in the room looked at her expectantly. After Lu Meiqing came in, she sighed helplessly and shook her head. "Nothing at all. I didn't dare to test Lin Wenwen. She is much smarter than her sister-in-law. I did test Qing Wangxue, but she didn't say anything useful." There were a total of 4 men sitting in the room. When they heard her say this, they all showed disappointed expressions. One of them frowned and said in a somewhat impatient tone, "We don't have much time and can't we get his keys? He doesn't have any surgery to do recently?" Lu Meiqing saw his impatience, but she couldn't do anything. She just said, "He has very few opportunities for surgery. Ordinary conditions can be treated with his own special ability. If it's not some serious injuries, he doesn't need surgery at all." Therefore, if she wanted to secretly take away his keys when he was having surgery, she had to wait for the next time he came for surgery. Have there been any emergency patients with external injuries recently? We can't wait any longer. If that doesn't work, then we'll send him a trauma patient who needs his surgery. Another man thought for a while with a calm expression before suggesting. Lu Meiqing looked at him in surprise. What do you want to do? A trace of ruthlessness flashed in the man's eyes as he said, since he must do the surgery himself, then we can only deal with the people around him. Adults can't do that, they are too vigilant. It's more successful to start with a child's hand. The others immediately understood what he meant, but they revealed a worried expression. Are you going to make a move on his niece? But Lin Feng is also very protective of this little girl. It won't be easy for us to make a move. The man turned to look at the person who spoke and shook his head. Who said I'm going to do it directly? We're going to start with the boy who has a good relationship with this girl. Everyone looked at each other blankly. A boy. Then one of them suddenly remembered something. Oh, you mean the little boy who was used by his father and thrown away, right? But his mother is also quite mysterious and she's the manager of the plantation. Yes, that's him. I know about his situation. His mother often brings him to the plantation, but I don't know how she taught him. This kid never tells anyone about the plantation, but I don't know how she taught him. The man said while holding his breath. He also wanted to find some information about the cultivation base from this kid, but this kid never talked about the cultivation base when he was outside. Although he couldn't get close to this kid to get information from him, he could still hear some things from the side. However, after watching this kid for a while, he realized that this kid never told anyone about the plantation. If someone asked him, he would silently look at them and shake his head. Or he would directly say, Mom doesn't allow me to say it. Oh, I know about that little boy. But this kid isn't easy to deal with. He's either with his mother, with Xiadong, or with that little girl from the Lin family. The others looked at him and said hesitantly. Recently, Xiadong hasn't been around. This kid is either at the plantation or with that little girl. There are still a lot of people around that little girl. Can he do it? Lu Meiqing also asked with some disapproval in her tone. The man said, those people are only protecting that little girl. No one is watching that kid. As long as it's not against that little girl, this kid isn't so strict. Everyone looked at each other and fell silent. The next day Lin Feng sat in his office. Duanxing and Chen Yuding both sat on the sofa and looked at Lin Feng. Is it these people? Lin Feng looked at the list they gave him and asked to confirm. Duanxing nodded to him and said, last night Lu Meiqing went to see these people. We followed their connections and investigated, and found that these people have been secretly doing something. Chen Yuding also echoed, their actions have always been very secretive and they are very vigilant. If we hadn't discovered Lu Meiqing, the spy, this time, we really wouldn't have known that these people were secretly doing these things. Lin Feng looked at Chen Yuding and asked, it's only been one night and you found so much? Are they all under control? He was a little worried that these two people might have acted too early and alerted the enemy. No, we didn't alert them. Duanxing shook his head at him and continued, someone sent us the news themselves. Lin Feng looked at him in surprise. Someone sent it themselves? Chen Yuding also nodded at this time. Yes, someone secretly sent the news themselves. It's probably someone from their own side. Who is it? Lin Feng's face, which was always expressionless, revealed a surprised expression as he asked. The other party didn't reveal their identity. We confirmed this information overnight. It's all true. Duanxing confirmed with him. Lin Feng looked at the name on the list in silence and didn't say anything. At this moment Li Jing suddenly ran in and said to them, that person sent news again. That group of people has set their target on Tong Tong. They are planning to attack Tong Tong and then seriously injure him so that he can operate on Lin Hao. They want to get Lin Hao's key. Chapter 1365. Hearing Li Zheng's words, the faces of the three people in the office darkened. Lin Feng snorted, I want to see how these people are going to deal with Tong Tong. Humph. They dared to target the children. These people had no bottom line at all. It must be known how important every child in the base was. They were the hope of the next generation and the future. Who would be willing to hurt them? These people are too much. They dare to lay their hands on the children. We don't have many children in our base. They dare. After Du Yuanxing was stunned, his face immediately became angry. And Qin Yuding's face was also gloomy. After all, after Qin Yuzhen became a zombie, he was already prepared to not have a child. This also became a regret in his and Qin Yuzhen's hearts, so he would have a special feeling for the other children in the base. Now that he heard these people were unscrupulous enough to lay their hands on the children, it was really intolerable. Lin Feng thought for a moment. Very well, since they have set their sights on the children. Then we will beat them at their own game and let them make their move. After he finished speaking, the others instantly turned to look at him with some disapproval. How can this be? What if they really hurt Tong Tong? Yuanqing immediately opened his mouth to oppose. This is too risky. Qin Yuding looked at him with a face of protest. Lin Feng said, if we don't give them enough reason, how can we catch them all in one net? Besides, it's not that I don't care about Tong Tong, I also care about him. So when the other party makes their move, we will stop them in time. Believe me, Tong Tong will be fine. Qin Yuding and the other two looked at each other, then said, we have to discuss this matter with Lu Jun and see if she will agree. Lin Feng immediately looked at Li Jing and said, go and invite Lu Jun over first. Li Jing looked at the others and nodded, yes. When the time comes, I will let Wang Shui protect Tong Tong at the first moment. With her reaction, it will be very difficult for those people to succeed. Don't worry, Tong Tong's protection will not be lax. Lin Feng looked at Du Yuanqing and Qin Yuding and promised. Du Yuanqing and Qin Yuding subconsciously looked at each other and had nothing to say. Lin Feng had asked his wife to leave her daughter behind to protect Tong Tong. What else could they say? Moreover, he was right. Qing Wangshue's ability was physical, so she was the most suitable for close-range protection. Not long after, Li Jing brought Lu Jun over. Lu Jun came in and saw the three of them. He stood in front of Lin Feng with some confusion, but he didn't say anything. He only looked at Lin Feng silently, waiting for him to speak first. When Lin Feng saw her, he pointed to the chair that Li Jing had moved over for her. After seeing her sit down, he explained the reason to her. It's like this. We've just received news that a group of people want to touch Tong Tong so that Tong Tong will be seriously injured and go to Lin Hao for surgery. They wanted to take advantage of Lin Hao's surgery to take away Lin Hao's key and open Lin Hao's secret cabinet to steal information. So I want to discuss with you now. I want Tong Tong to pretend to be attacked by them, and then we can catch them all in one fell swoop. Punish them for intentionally harming the children and stealing the base's information in an attempt to betray the base. When Lu Jun heard him say that someone wanted to hurt Tong Tong, her heart skipped a beat. But after she calmly listened to Lin Feng's words, she began to think about the meaning behind his words. After thinking for a while, she finally understood what Lin Feng meant. She frowned at Lin Feng and said, do you want Tong Tong to lure them out? Because the other party had already set their eyes on Tong Tong, if they suddenly hid Tong Tong at this time, then the other party would definitely suspect something, and they would immediately withdraw their claws. If they wanted to convict them, they would have to spend another period of time and effort. If they could directly make a move on Tong Tong, there was no more direct and powerful evidence than catching them in the act. And they wouldn't have to spend more time and energy dealing with the other party. I will remember that Wang Shui will personally protect Tong Tong, so you don't have to worry about Tong Tong's safety. Seeing Lu Jun frown, Lin Feng thought that she was worried about Tong Tong's safety, so he promised her. Lu Jun looked up at him. To be honest, she was indeed worried about Tong Tong's safety. And she didn't really believe Lin Feng's promise. Although the other party really wanted to protect Tong Tong, nothing was 100% certain. What if something went wrong? But since Lin Feng said that he wanted Qing Wangxue to protect Tong Tong, Lu Jun was in a bit of a dilemma. Lu Jun wasn't too clear about Qing Wangshue's strength, but if Qing Wangxue wanted to protect Tong Tong, then she would definitely put Xiao Lu aside. She was willing to put her own child aside to protect her own child. Lu Jun couldn't refuse because she knew that she couldn't be Tong Tong's bodyguard at this time. Because any random action of hers could arouse the other party's suspicion. Seeing Lu Jun's hesitant expression, Lin Feng thought for a while and suddenly said, how about this, I ask Elmar to help. With Elmar here, her protection should be more effective than Wang Shui's. In order to reassure the mother, Lin Feng could only ask Elmar to come over. Because Elmar could turn invisible and was a level 7 zombie. If she specialized in protecting Tong Tong, no one could really do anything to him. Hearing this, Lu Jun was stunned. But she didn't say anything. If Lin Feng could ask Elmar to specifically protect Tong Tong, then she had nothing to worry about. After thinking for a while, she finally asked a question. Are you sure that this will be able to find all those people? Lin Feng glanced at the others and they all understood and nodded together. Yes, don't worry about this. Now that we've grasped their movements, we're aware of their every move. As long as we attack when they are unprepared, they won't be able to hide their tails in time. Du Yuanqing looked at Lu Jun and said. Lu Jun nodded. Okay, because of what you said, I will agree to this matter. I hope that you will let go of any pest that wants to destroy us and at the same time, let my Tong Tong come back safely. Tong Tong's safety is very important to all of us. I will have a good talk with Elmarch. Lin Feng said to her with a serious face. After Lu Jun left, Lin Feng immediately asked Li Jing, did that person reveal the exact time of those people's plan? Li Jing shook his head and said, he didn't say, he only said that he will make a move soon. So that we can prepare in advance. Chapter 1366. Hearing Li Jing say that he didn't have an accurate time, the others weren't disappointed. After all, it was good enough that he was willing to secretly pass on the information. Lin Feng and the others were curious about the person who quietly passed on the information. However, they didn't deliberately test the other party's identity. Since the other party wasn't willing to reveal their identity, they still had to respect the other party. Alright, I'll find some time today to look for Elmar at the second base. This matter is decided. Alright, be more vigilant these few days and pay more attention to the movements around the cultivation base. There are many moles in our base now. We can't let them cause trouble at this time. Lin Feng said to the three of them. The three nodded at the same time. Understood. Lin Feng said to Du Yuanqing, Old Du, prepare some men and keep an eye on their nest. When they're about to move, take down the people in their nest in one fell swoop. Old Chen, pay attention to the movements around Tong Tong. Pay attention to his safety and don't let anything happen to him. Du Yuanqing and Qin Yuding nodded at the same time. All right. After giving the instructions, Lin Feng first sent someone to inform Elmar in the afternoon before going to look for the other party. What? Moles. Really, I've already said that none of these people from Hidden Cloud City or Ground Dragon really want to stay here. It must be them, right? Once she heard that there were moles preparing to cause trouble at this time, Elmar's face immediately darkened. Her dark green eyes revealed a fierce glint, and even the color of her pupils darkened. Lin Feng saw her angry look and said with a smile, people's hearts always change. Maybe they just think of this as a temporary shelter. Once the crisis was over, they would slowly plan the direction they really wanted to go. Everyone's thinking is different. It's normal. Maybe they feel that this place isn't suitable, or maybe they feel that our base's strength isn't enough. However, no matter what they think, it's impossible for them to take away the secrets of our base. I won't allow such a thing to happen. If those people didn't know anything and wanted to leave, Lin Feng could still let them go. But they weren't obedient and wanted to take away the secrets of their base. That was impossible. When Elmar was angry, her small face would be cold, but her eyes would emit a fierce light. She pursed her lips tightly and did not reply to Lin Feng. Qiu Lily and Lin Kuei were calmer than her, but only Lin Kuei was calmer. Qiu Lily also pursed her lips, her cheeks puffing up. Humph. Let them do it. If they hadn't done it, we wouldn't have been able to find them. Since there were so many people now, it was inevitable that there would be some people whose minds were not here. Since they don't want to be here, then we don't want to keep them. Drive him away. Qiu Lily said angrily. So what's your plan now? Elmar knew that Lin Feng must have come up with a plan. Lin Feng explained the plan to them before continuing. Since they can't wait any longer, let's wait for them to reveal their claws. Only when they bared their claws and teeth would their crimes be confirmed. At that time, it will be reasonable for us to deal with them however we want. Elmar said, I didn't expect Junjun to agree to your plan. It must have been hard on her. Alright, I will try my best to protect Tong Tong. But don't let any of the moles escape this time. Lin Feng's face was still serious as he said, if this operation to catch the moles is successful, it will probably make some people from other organizations who have bad intentions stop for a while. I hope the buffer time of this beating will be longer. As long as they carried out this operation, it would definitely have an impact. It was good to beat the other moles and make them stay put for a while. Anyway, in a base, the existence of these undercover moles could never be eliminated. With more and more people, people's hearts would become more and more uncontrollable. That was why all the major bases would set up rules to warn everyone in the base, letting them know that anyone who violated the rules would be punished. Do the defense well and don't be afraid of what these people will do. If they dare to come, they dare to kill them. Almar said coldly. Soon Lin Feng and Almar finished their discussion. Almar immediately moved to Tongtong's side and activated the invisibility mode to protect him. Lu Jun was still doing his own work in the cultivation base as usual, but he secretly sent more people to patrol the edge of the cultivation base. And the scope of the defense was also expanded to a certain distance. After Almar went to protect Tongtong, the second zombie legion was temporarily suppressed and managed by Qiu Lily and Lin Ran. Qiu Lily didn't like to manage things and she didn't understand the affairs of the legion. So she let Lin Ran manage it for the time being. Fortunately, Xiaodong had trained a lot of military managers. Now that he was not there, these people were temporarily managing and training the members of the legion. On the other side, Lu Meiqing's group didn't know that Lin Feng already knew about their general action, so they were watching Tongtong and looking for the right opportunity to make a move. However, while they wanted to make a move, they didn't want to expose themselves, so they wanted to do it secretly and create an accident. After observing for a while, they finally prepared to make a move on the day when Tongtong and Lin Xiaolu were sent home after they separated. Because at this time every day the defense around Tongtong was the weakest. At the same time Lin Xiao led everyone out of the ground. She was invisible when she came out. When she came out, she was invisible because she smelled the presence of a group of people outside the cave. Obviously there were people guarding outside the cave. She had already guessed this, so she wasn't surprised. So she quietly climbed out while invisible and no one noticed her at all. After she came out, she observed and found that there didn't seem to be her people among these groups of people. It seemed that she came out early and the people in her base hadn't been arranged to come over yet. Lin Xiao didn't care about this. Since these people wanted to guard here until she came out, then let them continue to guard. She quickly left the place. Not long after she left, a red shadow emerged from the cave. And it rushed into the sky. It stood in the sky and looked down at the ground, then flicked its tail and disappeared in a flash. The people on the ground didn't see it clearly and it disappeared. Is this a creature from the underground? Can actually fly. Is it strange that it can fly? There are all kinds of underground creatures and many of them can fly and jump. Don't worry about this thing, we're not waiting for it. Chapter 1367. Lin Xiao didn't go back to the base but to Huaxia. Before she went back, she had to go to China to see if Xikong Chen had done anything. After leaving the cave a few kilometers away, Lin Xiao found a place with no one around and let everyone out of the space. She also let the 4 pets out to get some fresh air. Few were finally out. After everyone came out, they could finally see the sun. They all felt a sense of relief after seeing the sun again. Whether it was humans or zombies, they all felt the same. No matter how good the zombies' eyesight was, they still thought like humans. In the dark underground environment, it was very stifling. I need the sun to shine. I feel like I'm either covered in mold or that strange poisonous energy in that underground space. Kong Qingming raised his beautiful face to the sun and took a deep breath before lowering his head and rubbing his arms. Other than him, the others were very calm. Long Qingying stood behind Lin Xiao expressionlessly, and found a flat area to stand with Duan Wan and the others. After Lu Tianyi came out, he only looked at the sky and then stared at the 3 guys running around with Dehei. Air Wang and Big Mushroom, no matter if they were underground or on the ground, as long as they came out, they would run around like wild horses. And the little tiger that was left in the space by Lin Xiao was released this time, and began to chase after the 2. From time to time it would run to a tree and touch its paws. Then we'll leave first. After Lei Qing came out, he expressionlessly told Lin Xiao that they were going back to hand in the mission. Lin Xiao turned around and nodded. Okay, I won't see you out. Lei Qing immediately led his people and left, leaving behind 2 groups of people from Universal Base and Ocean City. The people still didn't know where Lin Xiao took them to, and after calming down, they all began to inquire about the surrounding geography. By the way, where are we now? Lin Xiao said to Kong Qingming, you take your people back to Haiqing to hand in the mission, I still have to go to China to find out their current situation and then go back. Hearing this, Kong Qingming didn't say anything. He took a second look at Long Qingying, then looked at Lin Qiao eagerly. Lin Qiao said angrily, "What are you looking at? She doesn't want to go back with you, so there's no point in looking at me. Go 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 go." As she spoke, she swept Kong Qingming away like a fly. Kong Qingming looked at her speechlessly, then at Long Qingying. However, Long Qingying turned her eyes away and looked elsewhere. Therefore he could only dejectedly take the other people of Sea City and leave in the car that Lin Qiao had stored in the space. After watching the two groups of people leave, Lin Qiao brought his men and drove in the direction of Huaxia. In fact, she wanted to go back to her base to see her son first. However, she did not forget her responsibilities as the leader of a base. Eliminating the hidden dangers of the base was also her top priority. Because this cave was right in between China and the base, it was better to go and gather some information before going back. Since he wanted to get rid of Huaxia, he had to figure out what the other party was planning. When they reached the ground, Duanwan couldn't help but ask while driving, "Will that level 9 creature come up to the ground? If it really comes up, who can beat it? Even the level 9 paranormal in Qingshan base is no match for it, right?" Now everyone had discovered that among zombies, mutant animals, humans, underground creatures and so on, humans might not be the weakest in combat. But it was certain that these underground creatures were the strongest. Human paranormal couldn't even beat zombies of the same level, let alone these underground creatures that were immune to paranormal energy. Lin Qiao sat in the front passenger seat, her elbow propped against the window. She looked outside. After hearing Duanwan's words, she looked outside and said, "Whether it comes up or not is a matter for the future. Who knows? Maybe it doesn't want to come up, and even if it wants to come up, it won't be now. If it doesn't come out with the poisonous energy, it doesn't matter. If it really comes out with it, then we can only increase our strength and work together to get rid of this big guy. We can't beat one, but we can beat a group of them. If that big guy came out with the mutated energy and harmed the ecological environment, then even if they couldn't beat it now, it didn't mean they couldn't beat it in the future. Each of them had a lot of room for improvement. If one level 9 paranormal couldn't beat it, then what about 2? If 2 couldn't beat it, then 3. What was the characteristic of humans? It was unity. The most important thing now isn't this guy but humans. It's already like this, but that bastard Sikong Chen doesn't know how to unite to solve the current situation. He still thinks about attacking Haicheng all day long. I don't know if his brain has been infected by a virus." Lin Qiao continued. Duanwan held the steering wheel with one hand and looked ahead. She said expressionlessly, "I think his brain isn't normal. Only a lunatic would do something like that." She also knew that many scientific researchers in Huaxia were actually controlled by Sikongchen using lowly methods. Not everyone was willing to stay in the base in Huaxia, but there was nothing they could do if their weakness was grasped. Of course, half of them were willing. After all, the treatment wasn't bad. For their own ambitions and goals, and scrupulous means without going offline, only a lunatic would do that. Clearly, the threat to humans wasn't just zombies, there was also the mutated environment, mutated animals and plants, and underground creatures. These were all problems for humans to continue to survive. Originally, all the major bases should have united to discuss countermeasures on how to create an environment suitable for humans to survive under such harsh conditions. But in the end, as the largest base in the country, the first human survivor base seemed to be thinking about the future of humans on the surface, but secretly wanted to deal with humans. She didn't know what Sikong Chen and his subordinates were thinking. Lin Qiao sighed and said, "The thoughts of a lunatic aren't something you normal people can understand. Oh, us zombies can't understand either." The last sentence was obviously a joke. Duanwan speechlessly turned her head and glanced at her. "Even if your identity is a zombie, as long as your soul and consciousness are still human, it's fine." Lin Qiao shrugged. "I thought it wasn't easy to be a human before. Now I find it even more difficult to be a zombie with both human and wild characteristics." There were many moral shackles in being a human, and the distinction between good and evil in human nature. Now that she was a zombie, she was still imprisoned by the human morality in her mind. She still had to fight against the wild instincts of zombies to eat humans. If she wasn't careful, she might feel sweet in her mouth, but her mind would be extremely disgusted. Chapter 1368. Duanwan said, "In fact, even when you were a human, Sometimes you had to fight against your own impulses, didn't you? The logic is the same, it depends on how you control it. Even humans had wild instincts. Some people were naturally heartless and some people developed extreme thoughts later on. Otherwise, why would there be so many perverts in society? Even humans were scarier than zombies. Even if they were zombies, they would still be affected by the memories of humans. They might not be scarier than humans. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to turn zombies into humans. I once saw a zombie movie. The male lead was a zombie and in the end he turned into a human. But that was just a movie. I still couldn't figure out how the zombie's heart could recover. This isn't a Western mythological movie, this is science fiction, right? Is there no scientific explanation? Lin Xiao suddenly pressed on her heart and muttered to herself. Her heart was still calm, and her cold body temperature didn't allow her to turn into a human. But the little Ting-Ting she gave birth to had a heartbeat. Why was that? Wasn't this the end of the world? It was the era of science, but she came back from the dead and lived in someone else's body. And she used this zombie's body to give birth to a child with a heartbeat, and her own sister could travel back 7 years. She always felt that she took the wrong script. This shouldn't be a science fiction world with zombies. This should be a supernatural world with undead spirits and ghosts. Just as Lin Xiao was complaining that she had taken the wrong script, one of the people sitting behind her couldn't help but speak up. Not now, maybe in the future? Don't forget that you gave birth to a human. Lu Tianyi listened to the two of them talking and couldn't help but interrupt. If only I could become a human. Duanwan just sighed and said. After all, zombies couldn't see beautiful colors and couldn't eat delicious food. Other than the taste of human flesh, they couldn't eat anything else, and it felt like they were deprived of the right to enjoy life. Thinking about it again, it wasn't just this kind of thing that was deprived. Now that the whole world is mutating, maybe there really is something that can turn zombies into humans. Nature also had its own laws. What if it really existed? Yuan Tianxing was also let out for a breath of fresh air. He said with a smile. Yuan Tianxing had 0 combat power now, so they had to send a few people to protect him. When the car was more than 10 kilometers away from China, Lin Xiao asked everyone to disperse. She didn't put them back into the space but let them wait outside. She went into Huaxia to investigate. If he wanted to know what China was planning, he naturally had to look for Xikongchen. Now that he had found Xikongchen, it would be easy to know what he was up to. After Lin Xiao quietly entered China, he followed Xikongchen's aura to find him. It turned out that this guy wasn't at home, but in the leader's office in the government building. China's government buildings were connected together. Lin Xiao sneaked into the building invisibly. There were a lot of staff and guards in the building and they came and went frequently, so it was easy for Lin Xiao to sneak in. She climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator. Anyway, with her physique she didn't feel anything even if she ran up dozens of floors of stairs. At this time, Xikongchen was alone in his office, reading a proposal. Moreover, there were a few pieces of paper on the table and he was reading them back and forth. When Lin Xiao came over, his door wasn't open. Of course, she couldn't turn into smoke like a ghost and enter through the crack of the door, so she either waited at the door or thought of a way to enter. The aura in the room told her that there was only Xikongchen inside. There was no one inside, so even if she wanted to listen, she couldn't hear anything. Lin Xiao looked at the guards on both sides of the door, and then looked at the room next to Xikongchen's office. She took 2 steps back, then walked to the door of the other room to take a look. This room's door was open and there was a conference room inside. No one was currently using it. She walked in, walked to the window and stretched her head out to look in the direction of Xikongchen's office. It wasn't difficult to climb from this window to that other window, so she just wanted to confirm whether Xikongchen's window was open or not. At this moment she heard footsteps outside the door. Lin Xiao immediately went back to the door and looked outside. She felt relieved. It was Wei Haichao who was walking over from afar, and his goal was Xikongchen's office. Since someone was coming over, there was no need to climb through the window. Wei Haichao, who was wearing a dark green military uniform, was holding a document in his hand. He flipped through it as he walked over to Xikongchen. When he reached the door, he knocked on it, then opened the door and pushed it in. "What's the situation?" Xikongchen sat at his desk and looked up at him. After asking, he lowered his head to continue reading the proposal. Wei Haichao looked at him and said, "News from Haiqing has arrived. Isn't it about time?" Sikong Chen watched as he came in and handed him the information in his hands. He didn't stand up but sat on the chair and reached out to take it. Wei Haichao glanced at the blueprints on the table, then looked at Sikong Chen and said, "Haiching is ready. Can we make a move?" Sikong Chen looked down at the document and said without raising his head, "Professor Bai hasn't confirmed it yet." When Wei Haichao heard him mention Professor Bai, he sighed and said, "I really don't understand Professor Bai's thoughts. Isn't it a good time now? How long does he have to wait?" Sikong Chen said, "After all, this is his plan. We can't interfere too much." While the two of them were talking, Lin Xiao had already quietly walked to the side of the two of them. She stood at the corner of the desk and stretched her head to look at the various proposals and blueprints on Sikong Chen's desk. She almost couldn't control her breath when she saw it. Fortunately, she calmly suppressed the fluctuations of her emotions. After looking for a while, she found that there was something special in Sikong Chen's proposal, and it was related to this Professor Bai they were talking about. And what made her angry was that the first step of Sikong Chen's plan was to make a move in Haiching. Previously, he summoned these leaders to Huaxia to lure Wu Qingyue out of Haiching, because they had successfully brought some things that were bad for the survivors in Haiching into Haiching, because their spies in Haiching hadn't been cleaned up by Xiao Yunlong. Chapter 1369. Lin Xiao stared at the first step of Sikong Chen's plan. She couldn't help but feel a surge of murderous intent towards the Chinese. They had actually brought the source of the zombie virus into Haiching. Because Haiching base was indeed very large, there were many spies in there, whether they were planted there by themselves or secretly instigated by the Chinese. So even if Xiao Yunlong had been thinking of ways to eliminate these spies, he couldn't completely eradicate them. Especially every time Haiching wiped out the spies, it would sound the alarm bells for the spies who hadn't been discovered yet. This made them even more careful in hiding. What made Lin Xiao angry was that the Chinese completely disregarded the lives of the hundreds of thousands of survivors in Haiching. They wanted to destroy the entire city and bury the lives of all living humans. This method was the same as 2 years ago when Earth Dragon joined forces with Hidden Cloud City and Skyfire Base to attack Hades Base. There were less than 20,000 people left in Hades Base. Hundreds of thousands of people died. Lin Xiao's heart was filled with hostility. She really wanted to kill the Sikong Chen right now. But she couldn't. From the looks of it, he wasn't the only one who planned this operation. There was someone else who conspired with him. This person must be the Professor Bai they were talking about. But what made Lin Xiao ponder was the attitude of Sikong Chen and Wei Haichao. They seemed to be wary of this Professor Bai. Although she couldn't sense Sikong Chen's thoughts, Lin Xiao could hear Wei Haichao's thoughts. Just from the title of professor, she knew that this person wasn't an ordinary person. Lin Xiao stared at the plan on Sikong Chen's desk, memorizing the contents. At the same time, she listened to Wei Haichao's thoughts. She found that when Professor Bai was mentioned, Wei Haichao was actually a little impatient. But at the same time, he was afraid of him. The reason was that many new weapons were developed in Professor Bai's base. In fact, China's truly advanced weapons weren't developed by the scientific experts in Sikong Chen's research building. It was the result of Professor Bai's painstaking research in another secret base. But how could there be such a person and yet not a single piece of information was leaked? She didn't know about this person at all, but she didn't know if Wu Qingyue, Lon Lu and the others knew about it. Lin Xiao thought about it and felt that they probably didn't know either. She had never heard of such a person since the beginning of the apocalypse. Moreover, the other party also had a secret weapons manufacturing base. She only knew that Sikong Chen should have a secret base that belonged to him, but she didn't know that Sikong Chen would cooperate with such a base. But that's not right. Didn't Sikong Chen want to cooperate with those foreigners? However, Lin Xiao didn't have a good impression of Professor Bai because he knew that he wasn't a good person. After all, the operation plan for Sea City on Sikong Chen's desk was Professor Bai's idea. This Professor Bai actually didn't put so many people in Sea City in his eyes. Such a person was indeed in cahoots with Sikong Chen. At this time, Wei Haichao said, "Then how long do we have to wait? If we wait any longer, the underworld creatures will make their move. This is a rare opportunity. If we miss it, we will lose the chance of victory." Hearing Wei Haichao suddenly say that the underworld creatures seemed to be making a move, Lin Xiao's heart moved. At this time, Sikong Chen put down the documents in his hands, raised his head and leaned back. He looked at him and said, "That's right. After these underworld creatures suddenly advanced in a large number, they will feel very hungry. Moreover, they like to eat human flesh, so the situation of attacking the base will definitely appear. I will talk to Professor Bai again. If he doesn't agree, the operation will continue as usual. When he said the last sentence, his tone became a bit firm. Wei Haichao immediately looked at him in surprise. Is this really okay? Angering him won't do us any good, right? Si Kongqin looked at him. Don't worry. Although he is threatening me and saying that he wants to change partners in this situation, we know everything about him. We have long been bound to him. Even if he wants to leave, I won't let him go. Wei Haichao looked at him with a look of hesitation. Are you sure? Si Kongqian's face that had always been wooden revealed a cold expression at this time. He coldly snorted. I've had enough of his attitude of ordering me around like a subordinate. If he really doesn't want to cooperate with me, then we don't have to continue toasting with him. He was a dignified leader of Huaxia, but he still had to do things according to the professor's mood. He had long been impatient. If it wasn't for the fact that the other party's knowledge and research methods were incomparable to ordinary people, in order to obtain the things that the other party had researched, he had no choice but to be more gentle. He had completely lowered his stance because he wanted the other party to lower his guard against him so that he could wholeheartedly make weapons for him. He didn't expect the other party to gradually climb over his head. Did he really think that he was easy to control? Wei Haichao was silent for a few seconds before nodding. Actually, you should have made this decision long ago. Wei Haichao stared at him in silence for a few seconds before nodding. Actually, you should have made this decision a long time ago. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to create such a large underground secret base. Moreover, he brought so many people underground to explore, but in the end only a few of them escaped. Moreover, he had brought so many people to explore underground, but in the end only a few of them had escaped. Do you think it's because of what they did down there in the past? Do you think it's because they did something down there back then? The more Lin Qiao listened to him, the colder his heart became. Was this Professor Bai the culprit behind the outbreak of the underworld creatures? Could it be that the underground space that they saw when they went down this time was not like what they saw now? If that was the case, Lin Qiao would never forgive this so-called Professor Bai. Si Kongqin listened to his words and coldly lowered his eyes. He said, no matter what he did down there a few years ago, he's responsible for dealing with these things now. As long as he doesn't get in my way, I'll let him know the consequences of hindering me. Wei Haichao nodded. Alright, I'll wait for your letter. Once the operation is confirmed, send someone to inform me. After saying that, he left Si Kongqian's office, leaving Si Kongqian sitting in his seat. He turned his head to look out the window and quietly thought for more than 10 seconds before turning his head back. He began to tidy up the proposal on the table. Chapter 1370. Lin Qiao quietly watched as he packed up his things, kept the blueprints and plans, then turned around and left the office. She followed behind Si Kongqin, and it seemed like he was going to discuss something with Professor Bai. However, very quickly Lin Qiao saw Si Kongqin heading out of China's base. And wasn't Professor Bai's secret base in China? However, the direction Si Kongqin was heading in soon gave her the answer. After following Si Kongqian's car for more than an hour, she finally found out that his car had driven into a strange place. It was a mountain forest. When she reached this place, she didn't need Si Kongqin to continue leading the way. She could already smell a lot of human scents, and there was a large group of people hiding here. Following the scent of those people, Lin Qiao's figure quickly leaped from tree to tree, heading towards the source of those human scents. After walking for a short distance, she saw that the forest in front of her was filled with many machine guns. And from the looks of it, it was a type of modified high-power machine gun. Lin Qiao slightly stopped and looked left and right at the number of weapons. There were indeed quite a number. With the defense of these weapons, any random level 4 or 5 mutant beasts that came in would be turned into a hornet's nest. After quickly observing the situation, Lin Qiao once again snuck in. Not long after entering, there was indeed another layer of weapons, and the equipment was even more concentrated than the one outside. There was also a very high-end detection and defense system that was repeatedly scanning the surroundings. There was a steel building in front, and it wasn't very tall, just like a small factory. Lin Qiao walked to the entrance and took a look, and there were quite a number of armed soldiers guarding the building. At this time, Si Kongqian's car came in from outside, and his car was not parked outside. Seeing Xikong Chen's car coming in, the door immediately opened and the car drove in. Lin Xiao quickly entered the door and inside was an empty factory. It was about 400 square meters and other than the 4 thick metal walls and a ceiling, there were only machine gun muzzles on the walls. There was nothing else. Xikong Chen's car stopped by the side and he got out of the car. 2 soldiers pressed a button on a control panel behind the door, and an underground passage opened up in the middle of the factory. Seeing Xikong Chen leading his men down, Lin Xiao also silently followed behind them. After entering, Lin Xiao finally saw the entrance to the secret base. Below it were all staff in lab coats and there were all kinds of different experimental areas and so on. Just by looking at the large number of signs in the entrance hall, Lin Xiao could almost guess the scale of this place. This was a very large experimental base and it was not just for weapons experiments. After Lin Xiao carefully observed the signs, he followed Xikong Chen. He wanted to see what kind of person Xikong Chen was looking for, Professor Bai. As soon as Xikong Chen came in, someone led him to where Professor Bai was. Professor Bai wasn't in his office this time. Instead, he was doing experiments in a certain experimental area. After walking for a few minutes, they finally arrived at the entrance of an experimental area. After walking in, they saw rows of laboratories. These laboratories were all made of tempered glass, so one could clearly see what was going on inside. After Lin Xiao sneaked in, the first thing he saw in the laboratory was a creature he had never seen before. But from the appearance, it looked like an underground creature. She walked over curiously and took a closer look. Then she continued to look at the next laboratory and discovered that it was another type of underground creature. Lin Xiao turned around and there was also a row of laboratories behind her. The difference was that this row of creatures wasn't made up of underworld creatures but zombies. After quickly observing the situation of these experimental creatures, Lin Xiao turned around and continued to follow Xikong Chen. When Xikong Chen arrived at the entrance of a special laboratory, he stood there and waited motionlessly. He just quietly watched a bunch of people in the laboratory busy with their work. Lin Xiao peeked inside and found that the space in the laboratory was quite large, about 200 square meters. More than a dozen people were busy with their own things, and there was also a tall old man with white hair who was carefully observing the data on the instrument. At this time, a researcher near the door noticed Xikong Chen outside the door, so he put down his work and quietly walked to Professor Bai's side, and whispered something in his ear. The old man did not respond after listening, and his eyes were still fixed on the instrument. After the researcher finished speaking, he immediately returned to his post and continued to work. Lin Xiao stared at the old man for a long time, but she had no impression of him. Obviously, he was not someone she knew and she had never heard of him before. She turned her head to look at Xikong Chen next to her. This man previously expressed his disdain for Professor Bai in her base, but now that he was here, he did not dare to disturb Professor Bai. She didn't know what Professor Bai had that made him lower his status on the surface. When there was no movement from either side, Lin Xiao began to look around and collect all kinds of information. In addition to this laboratory with people, there were also rows of glass laboratories in all directions. There were also strange experimental creatures locked inside, and she did not know what Professor Bai was doing with these experimental creatures. Just like this, Xikong Chen stood quietly for 2 or 3 minutes. Professor Bai turned around, took off his gloves and walked out. He glanced at Xikong Chen, walked out and said, "What's the matter?" As he spoke, he walked out. Xikong Chen followed him and said, "The preparations in Sea City are almost done. I think now is the time to start the first step. If we wait any longer, most of the advanced underground creatures will start to attack the human base. At this time, the major bases will definitely be busy dealing with these underground creatures, and so will Sea City. We will have a high chance of success if we secretly attack when Sea City is unprepared." Professor Bai, who was walking forward, turned his head to look at him and then continued walking. As he walked, he said, "What's the hurry? Even if these underground creatures advance, the drug won't take effect so quickly." When Xikong Chen heard this, he could not help but show a puzzled expression. "Huh? But didn't you say that as long as these things start to advance on the surface, it will trigger changes in their bodies?" Professor Bai glanced at him. "That's what I said, but I didn't tell you when these underground creatures' bodies will change after they advance. There is always a process, so it will take a little more time." Hearing this, a trace of impatience flashed in Xikong Chen's eyes. He asked, "How long will it take?" "Professor Bai, About half a month later. Chapter 1371. Sikongchen was silent for 2 seconds before saying, "In other words, we have to wait 10 days before we can start?" Professor Bai nodded and said, "The zombie virus medicine that I gave you has an incubation time of 5 to 7 days. You can wait until 10 days before you start. That way, after 15 to 17 days, those infected with the virus will all act up. This way the virus will act up at the same time as the underground beast. I believe Wu Qingyue will be caught off guard." Lin Xiao listened to their conversation with a blank expression. She knew that Professor Bai had been studying these underground creatures for a long time. From the looks of the experimental subjects, the size of the experimental subjects at the entrance and the old man's laboratory were different. This meant that the level and class of these experimental subjects were different. Moreover, he got some information from their conversation. It seemed that a large number of underground creatures were advancing. Moreover, after leveling up, these creatures would also undergo physical changes. If they were just extremely hungry, they wouldn't attack the human base, right? They were omnivores and ate everything. Why was that? After thinking for a while, Lin Xiao suddenly thought of something. If she guessed correctly, Professor Bai and Sikongchen should be using some method to lure these extremely hungry underground creatures to the vicinity of the human base. After all, humans were social creatures. There were hundreds of thousands of people in a base. For these underground creatures there was plenty of food. Therefore, the premise was that someone needed to gather these underground creatures together and lure them to the vicinity of the human base. It seemed that this was one of their methods. Lin Xiao didn't see this step in Sikongchen's plan. Obviously, they had already implemented this step. Now they were just waiting for the results. Seeing that Professor Bai didn't object to his proposal this time, Sikongchen's expression relaxed slightly. He replied, "The underground creatures' gathering places around the major bases are almost at the end of the advancement process. Let's see which side is attacked first." The two talked as they walked and soon they arrived at Professor Bai's office. Lin Xiao followed them in and listened to their conversation while looking around Professor Bai's office. She first stared at his desk. Unfortunately, the documents on his desk were closed and not opened, so she couldn't see what she wanted. She glanced at the documents on the table and felt that she should look for the research database in the base later. She wanted to find out what kind of experiments Professor Bai had done. After Sikongchen left, Professor Bai did not continue to stay in his office. He also left this place and headed back to his laboratory. Lin Xiao began to search for information in his office alone. Not only did she sweep away all the information on his desk, the files on the cabinet next to him were also swept clean. As for the locks on the cabinets, they were all melted by Lin Xiao with her special abilities. After sweeping all the useful things in the office into the space, Lin Xiao began to search for the database. She knew that Professor Bai must have hidden a confidential database in this office. After all, he couldn't just leave some confidential documents in this office or in the base's database. The whole room was filled with Professor Bai's scent, but Lin Xiao could find the location of Professor Bai's secret collection of information through his scent. In fact, this location wasn't very hidden. It was in the floor under the chair where he sat. She squatted down and took a closer look. She found that the crack here was a bit too clean. She knocked with her hand and it was empty. Lin Xiao directly pressed her hand on the ground and concentrated her special abilities in her palm. Soon the floor melted away, revealing the stairway below. The stairs weren't very deep. It was only 3 meters high. There was a small door at the bottom. Lin Xiao directly swallowed the entire door, revealing the space inside. Fortunately, this door wasn't received by the base's security system, so the entire door didn't sound an alarm. It was dark inside, but it didn't prevent Lin Xiao from seeing the things inside. After entering, there was a secret room. There were indeed a lot of documents inside. The files were placed on a cabinet on the side and there were many glass bottles and jars. They were filled with unknown liquids and some viscera soaked in them. Looking at it, she could feel that it was like a specimen room. The atmosphere of a perverted Frankenstein was also full. Lin Xiao roughly glanced at these viscera specimens with her eyes. They were also marked with what creature they were taken from. After looking at it once, Lin Xiao lost interest. She turned around and walked to the file cabinets, looking at the categories and years on them. She raised her hand and touched the files with a blank expression, sweeping them all into her own space. After sweeping all the documents, Lin Xiao turned around and left the underground secret room. Professor Bai, who returned to his own experimental area, didn't know that a large number of his collected research materials had been plundered. He calmly began to observe the progress of his experiment, completely unaware of what would happen next. After Lin Xiao left the old man's office, she began to investigate the experimental base. She wandered around the various experimental areas like a ghost, completely unaware of her existence. After wandering around, she found that the research base wasn't small. Just by looking at the marked area on the map, she could roughly estimate how big this place was. The preliminary estimate was at least 30,000 to 40,000 square meters, and there were 3 floors. She was still on the first floor and there were 2 floors below. Lin Xiao stared at the 2 floors below the map, and suddenly a smirk appeared at the corner of her mouth. Then she turned around and walked down the 2 floors below. Very well, since she was here, she couldn't just leave like this. She had to do something, otherwise wouldn't she have come in vain? If she didn't do something, she would be letting down her identity as the leader of the enemy. After sneaking down through the ordinary escape tunnel, the 2nd floor was basically filled with live experimental subjects. Below the 3rd floor were frozen bodies. Especially below the 3rd floor, it was filled with dangerous things. Lin Xiao directly went down to the 3rd floor and stood in front of the entrance. After reaching out her hands and swallowing the entire door, she stretched both hands in and a billowing black flame suddenly surged out. Woo woo woo, beep beep beep. A violent alarm sounded throughout the entire underground research base. Chapter 1372. What's going on? What's going on? What's going on? The siren immediately made all the people in the base stunned at first, then they panicked with fear. After all, this was a special base. Something went wrong, they would all die here. And, after hearing the siren, many people immediately ran toward the exit reflexively. But soon the exit doors were all closed. Bang bang bang. The doors of the experimental areas in the major districts were also closed with a swoosh, trapping many people who did not manage to escape in time. No, no. The moment the door closed, everyone let out a despairing wail. One by one they rushed to the door and pressed the button to open the door. But these metal doors remained unmoved. They were still firmly closed. Professor Bai, who was still calmly doing the experiment, had a slight change in his expression. But he reacted quickly and rushed out of the laboratory. It was only when he moved that the others reacted. His expression immediately changed as he madly ran out. When they ran out, the doors of the various areas were closed. But this couldn't stop Professor Bai from leaving. He swiped his work card on the electronic door lock and opened it. After he passed, the door closed automatically. Professor, wait for us. Professor. A bunch of research assistants ran over behind him. Because they were a step too late, they could only watch Professor Bai leave without looking back. They completely ignored the desperate cries of the people who rushed to the door and grabbed it. After Lin Xiao released a ball of black fire, he immediately ran to the 2nd floor and released a ball of black fire as well. Then she turned around and ran to the 1st floor. As soon as she went up, she found that the door of the escape corridor was also closed. But this was normal. After all, the entire alarm system was ringing. But for Lin Xiao, this couldn't stop her at all. She just raised her hand and waved the fire over and the door disappeared. Roar. In addition to the incessant siren, there were roars of beasts coming from below. After Lin Xiao entered the 1st level of the experimental base, he saw that many doors were closed. It was probably the same for the lower levels. But under the raging black fire of Lin Xiao, it was as if the doors weren't closed. After she entered the laboratory on the 1st floor, she didn't leave immediately. Instead, he threw a few black flames in and burned the doors of these districts. She had long since discovered that the subjects here were actually ordinary people and none of them were adepts. Only the guards had the energy aura of adepts. Lin Xiao didn't want to find out if these ordinary researchers were willing to work here or if they were forced to. There were probably a lot of low-level staff who didn't even know what they were researching in this research base. She just wanted to destroy this base first, then kill Professor Bai, who dared to go against Xikongchen. No matter what he had researched, just the fact that he was working with Xikongchen to deal with Ocean City and her base was enough for her to not let him off. In addition, this old man was not an ordinary person. It would not be a good thing to let him escape. As for Professor Bai, he left a bunch of his subordinates and returned to his office with his work magnetic card. He was not in a hurry to run out of the base. Instead, he calmly returned to his office and prepared to take away some important information. He knew that it would take some time for the base's system to finally activate some commands. He didn't have time to think about anything else. The alarm had already told him that what he had to do now was to leave as soon as possible, because it was going to activate the self-destruct mechanism and destroy everything here. This base was his painstaking effort for the past 7 years. Although his heart ached, he still thought that his life was more important, so he calmly prepared to leave with some information first. As a result, when he arrived at his office, he almost vomited blood. His office desk was clean. The file cabinet was clean. Seeing this, he was stunned for a moment. Then he suddenly thought of something and his expression changed. He rushed to his seat and looked at the floor. He saw that the entrance that should have been hidden was now wide open, and it told him that someone had invaded here. When he ran down with an ominous premonition in his heart, he saw that several files were empty. Finally, he couldn't help but widen his eyes. Blue veins popped on his forehead as he raised his head and shouted, "Ah! Who is it?" Extreme anger made a violent impulse rise in his entire brain. He suddenly waved his hand inside. A white light flashed, and the bottles and jars inside instantly turned into ice sculptures in the blink of an eye. As he waved his hand again, these ice sculptures suddenly exploded. Bang, bang, bang. After the secret room was blown up into a piece of ice slag, Professor Bai turned around and rushed out. After rushing out of the office, he suddenly stopped and looked around. Then he turned around and quickly rushed in one direction. Soon he rushed to a door, opened the door with his magnetic card and walked in. Inside was an unmanned monitoring room. The entire room was filled with surveillance videos. Professor Bai scanned his palm and fingerprints several times before sitting in front of the monitoring computer in the middle and began to pull up the surveillance video. He widened his eyes and looked through it. As a result, he only saw that the surveillance video below the second and third floors was dark. He didn't see anything. From the previous video, they could only see a black flame rapidly surging into the various experimental areas. Black fire. It's that woman. When he saw these black flames, Professor Bai was stunned for a moment. Then he suddenly thought of Lin Xiao from the Universal Base. Then his expression changed and he blurted out, "She's not dead. She's out." "As I'm out." At this time, a cold woman's voice sounded behind him. Professor Bai turned his head and saw a long-haired woman leaning against the door with her hands crossed in front of her chest, looking at him with a smile. "It's you." Professor Bai immediately stood up when he saw her. He quickly waved his hand at her a few times, and a few white lights flew toward Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao flashed, and the place where she had just stood instantly turned into an icy white. Then the area that was covered by the ice exploded with a series of bangs. At this time, Professor Bai suddenly turned around and dodged to the side. He pushed the wall with both hands and a revolving door appeared and pushed him in. Chapter 1373. Watching Professor Bai's figure disappear behind the door, Lin Xiao sneered. "Wanna run? How could it be so easy?" As she sneered, she waved her hand and threw a ball of black fire at the door. Of course, the old man wanted to run because his ability was only at the 7th level. Moreover, he had just broken through to the 7th level. Lin Xiao was a level 8 ability user on the surface, but she was actually a level 8 zombie emperor. If she didn't run, she would only die. Of course, even if she ran, she might not be able to escape. But of course, it was impossible for a human to stay and wait for death. Even if there was a glimmer of hope, she would still fight. Puff. A soft sound was heard and the revolving door was swallowed up. Lin Xiao rushed over and saw that it was an elevator passage, and now the small elevator was rising rapidly. When she looked up, she only saw the bottom of the elevator at the top. When she raised her head to look up, he hooked his hand up as well. The ball of black fire immediately rushed up. The speed of black fire was very fast. In the blink of an eye, it stuck to the bottom of the elevator, and in the next second, a big hole was formed at the bottom of the elevator. Professor Bai was hiding at the edge in a panic, looking down with some surprise. Lin Xiao's legs kicked and she jumped up. Seeing Lin Xiao jump up, Professor Bai waved his hand to shoot a few white lights at her, and used his other hand to press on the wall behind him. The white lights he shot down instantly formed a thick wall of ice crystals in the space below. However, Lin Qiao's movements were faster than his special ability. Therefore, when the ground was frozen, Lin Qiao was already in front of Professor Bai. She didn't talk nonsense with him. As soon as she came up, she slammed her foot on the wall behind her, and used the black nails on her right hand to grab Professor Bai's neck. Lin Qiao's attack was very fast, almost too fast to be seen by the naked eye. Professor Bai had just finished releasing his ability, and when he pressed the button behind him. However, he saw a flash in front of him and a sharp claw suddenly grabbed his neck. In an instant it made him suffocate and his whole mind went blank. And cough you. Professor Bai's eyes widened and he glared at Lin Qiao in front of him. The feeling of suffocation and the sharp pain in his neck caused his entire face to contort. He never thought that this woman would find him here. It was actually this woman. His daughter had died in the underground space, but this woman had come up alive. How could this be? Why didn't she die down there? If I really let you run away just like that, then wouldn't I lose too much face? I am a zombie emperor after all. Lin Qiao smiled as he stared at his distorted face. She could sense his thoughts and was surprised that Xie Longyun was his daughter. What a coincidence, both father and daughter had fallen into her hands. It was just that this old man probably didn't know. As the elevator continued to rise, Lin Qiao stepped on a ball of black flame. She stretched her right hand forward and pinched Professor Bai's neck. Her 5 sharp nails had already pierced into his neck. She smiled faintly and said, "So you know that your daughter is dead, but you don't know. Do you know that she died in my hands?" This sentence successfully caused Professor Bai's emotions to fluctuate violently. Ignoring how intense the old man's reaction was, Lin Qiao continued to say with a smile, "However, for what you and Xikong Chen did, your daughter's death is your retribution. Now it's your turn. It's a pity that you didn't see Xikong Chen's end. Don't worry, his end won't be any better than yours." Ugh. Professor Bai glared at Lin Qiao with hatred, anger and pain. His hands subconsciously scratched his neck, trying to pry Lin Qiao's hands off. But the pain in his neck made him realize something, but he didn't have time to figure out what it was. This was because his entire brain was filled with hatred and anger, but he couldn't resist Lin Qiao. Because Lin Qiao had pinched his neck, she actually intercepted the flow of his ability energy to his body. It was all blocked in his head and he couldn't use his ability to attack at all. Ding! There was a soft sound and the elevator stopped at this time. Then the door opened with a chomp sound. Lin Qiao didn't give the old man a chance to continue living. She forcefully broke his thick neck. With a crack he broke his thick neck. Then he threw it out of the elevator. Putong. After dealing with old Bai, Lin Qiao walked out. Looking at the exit of this secret elevator, it was indeed not at the previous entrance. Instead it was in another forest 1 kilometer away. Lin Qiao jumped to the top of the tree and looked at the research base. Muffled explosions could still be heard from the other side, coming from underground. There were also cries of humans and roars of beasts. At the same time the ground trembled from time to time. From the looks of it, the base was almost completely destroyed. Listening to the muffled yet continuous explosions below, it was probably the newly developed weapons below that were blown up. She wondered if Xikong Chen would vomit blood out of anger when he found out that this secret base had been blown up. After all, she had destroyed a research factory of the other party and lost some technological skills. Perhaps he would thank her for helping him get rid of Professor Bai, who thought he could control everything. However, Lin Qiao didn't care about that. He turned around and flew away. After arriving at a place more than 10 kilometers away from the Huaxiao base, she called the others back. Come. You guys have nothing to do. Come in and show me the data." After Lin Qiao gathered them, she immediately threw them into the space. What data? Only Duan Wan, who was going to be Lin Qiao's driver, stayed outside and asked her in confusion. The research data on Xikong Chen's thermal weapons and biological weapons, Lin Qiao replied calmly after getting into the car. At this moment, after Xie Dong, Yuan Tianxing, Lu Tianyi, and the others were thrown in by Lin Qiao, they stood at the side and looked silently at the mountain of research data and files in the middle of the small building's hall. The 3 of them were speechless. Yuan Tianxing shrugged and said helplessly, all right. This is the only type of work I can do now." As he spoke, he waved at the group of people outside the door who were looking in. He turned around and shouted at them, "Why are you guys standing so far away? There's a part for you here too. Come over and classify them. Lin Yu, Feng Mingyu, and the others who were forced to be able-bodied, looked at the mountain of documents with a headache. They would rather go out and fight beasts and zombies. This kind of liberal arts work really gave them a headache. Chapter 1374. Lu Tianyi looked at the pile of documents speechlessly and said, "Did she ransack the database of the Huaxia Research Center? Who can understand this? We're not researchers. We have to let those who research weapons read it, right?" Compared to Yuan Tianxing and Lu Tianyi's ridicule, Xie Dong just quietly walked over and sat cross-legged on the floor to flip through the documents. First, of course, it was to categorize them by year, then by category. After sorting out and checking, the group of men immediately became so busy that they forgot what they were doing. Not long after Xikong Chen returned to the Huaxia base, a subordinate suddenly ran over to report in a panic. Reporting to the leader. "Something happened in the area you just went to." Xikong Chen sat down. The chair hadn't even warmed up yet when he looked up at the subordinate who ran in. He asked in confusion, "Something happened? What happened?" "He just came back from the secret base. It was fine when he went there and it was fine when he left. Why did something happen now?" The subordinate stood up in front of his desk and looked at him. "I just received an emergency report. That place is now completely destroyed." Xikong Chen suddenly stood up and stared at him expressionlessly. "What did you say?" "Report. 10 minutes after you left the secret weapon research base, the intruders destroyed the second and third floors of the underground laboratory. Then it caused the explosion of finished and semi-finished weapons in the weapons warehouse. Now the entire mountain has collapsed." The subordinate puffed out his chest and reported to him loudly. Xikong Chen's eyes twitched a few times before he gritted his teeth and asked, "What about Professor Bai?" The subordinate was silent for 2 seconds before he replied, "We haven't found him yet." Xikong Chen didn't have any reaction after hearing that. Instead, he was silent for a few seconds before he asked again, "Do you know who sneaked in?" The subordinate replied, "We're searching." This meant that he didn't know yet. Xikong Chen walked out of his seat and took his coat from the hanger beside him. Then he walked out of the door. "Prepare the car." "Yes." Although his expression was very calm, his aura couldn't help but overflow. His entire aura became a little manic. Lin Xiao didn't know Xikong Chen's reaction, but he could roughly guess. In terms of benefits, Xikong Chen would definitely vomit blood this time. In this post-apocalyptic world, nothing was more important than benefits. After listening to Lin Xiao's story, Duanwan was the first to laugh. "I didn't expect your luck to be so good. Xikong Chen is probably going to be pissed off after what you did. As soon as they left, you destroyed their secret weapon base." Lin Xiao shrugged. "Why don't you say that he was unlucky to meet me?" Duanwan glanced at her in amusement. "That's true, of all people Xikong Chen could have offended, but he didn't. Why would I provoke you? My ending won't be any better." She thought about what had happened to Earth Dragon, Hidden Cloud City, and Starfire. If Lin Xiao wanted to get her revenge, she wouldn't hesitate. The other party would not have a good ending, especially since Lin Xiao was different from before. Maybe it was because of the zombie's body, or maybe it was because it had died once. The current Lin Xiao was much more ferocious than when he was the leader of the Netherworld King's base. Lin Xiao looked at her angrily. "Why do I feel that there's something wrong with your words? Do you think I'm a max-level boss? Or a demon? But even if Xikong Chen didn't provoke me, someone would have taken care of him sooner or later. The things he did, he won't have a good ending." Duanwan looked at her and said, "But if it wasn't for you, I don't think it would be easy for Leader Wu to take care of him. In terms of firepower, Haiqing's strength has always been inferior. If it were a city war, Haiqing would be at a disadvantage. After all, he wasn't the only 8th-level adept. As long as Xikong Chen appeared to stall him, the army of Haiqing wouldn't be able to deal with the Chinese army. Although Xikong Chen's strength might not be able to defeat Wu Qingyue, it was also possible that he would use some method to temporarily increase his strength. There were all kinds of research in China. In particular, Xia Longyun had previously revealed that there was such a drug in China. Lin Xiao tilted her head and said calmly, "I didn't say that someone would be able to take care of them right now. There will be someone in the future." After saying that, she turned to look out the window and murmured, We need to solve the problem in China as soon as possible. When Duanwan heard this, she couldn't help turning to look at her. You seem to be in a hurry? Lin Xiao turned to look at her and didn't say anything. Ever since she was shaken by the 9th-level underground beast and almost shook out the zombie's instinctive consciousness in Lu Tianyu's body. Although she tried her best to wake up later, she always had an ominous premonition in her heart since this time. She felt that Lu Tianyu's zombie consciousness seemed to have woken up and would come out again next time. So now she had to quickly solve the matter in Huaxiao, and then find a place to quietly get rid of Lu Tianyu's zombie instincts. How could there always be a consciousness in her body that wanted to snatch the body from her? No wonder little Ting Ting said that as long as she could defeat it, the situation would be better. That was to say, she needed to completely remove this consciousness. But how to remove it, she still didn't have a clue. Maybe little Ting Ting would know? She inexplicably felt that little Ting Ting was a know-it-all. Speaking of which, this child knew a lot of things when he was in her space. Where on earth did he get this information from? When Sikong Chen ran to the secret base and saw that it had collapsed into a big sinkhole, he was so angry that his eyes almost turned green. In the end, when he couldn't find Professor Bai and the research materials here, he was so angry that he vomited blood. But he didn't know who did it. And the person who did this had already leisurely returned to his base. After releasing Yuan Tianxing and the others and the pile of materials from the space, Yuan Tianxing and the others were all dazed. Obviously they read the materials. Before Lin Xiao returned to the base, Almar, Qiu Lily, and Lin Kuei had already sensed her existence from afar. Is Qiao Qiao back? Qiu Lily looked at Lin Kuei with some doubts and asked uncertainly. Lin Kuei nodded to her. It should be, I also felt it. Although Lin Xiao restrained her breath as zombies, there was a special sense between each other. So Lin Feng, Wu Qingyue, and the others didn't notice her return. Only a few higher-level zombies did. Chapter 1375. When Lin Xiao came back, Almar, Qiu Lily and the other zombies all sensed her. But they didn't go out to welcome her because the spies were preparing to attack Tong Tong. It was just in the evening. After dinner, Tong Tong had to go home. Qing Wangxue sent someone to send him back. After watching Tong Tong leave from the window of her house, Lin Xiaolu turned to Qing Wangxue and asked, "Mom, can you catch the bad guys?" Although Lin Xiaolu's ability hadn't reached the 2nd level yet, she couldn't sense her parents' thoughts without Lin Feng and Qing Wangshue's initiative to reveal it. But she accidentally heard Qing Wangxue and Lin Feng talking about this in the living room. When she knew that someone was going to hurt her little friend Tong Tong, she was also worried. So she went to ask Qing Wangxue directly. Qing Wangxue saw that she had already found out about this, so she indirectly told her that she would protect Tong Tong. And she would quickly catch the bad guys who wanted to hurt Tong Tong, so she didn't have to worry. After hearing Lin Xiaolu's question, Qing Wangxue, who was sitting on the sofa, looked up at her. He said, "Yes, definitely. Tong Tong will be fine." After Tong Tong came out of Lin Xiaolu's house, he was taken in the direction of his home. Just as their car passed by a road with no people, a large piece of iron sheet suddenly fell from the top of the roadside building. Because this road was an alley, there were buildings on both sides. But the buildings here hadn't been arranged for people to live in, so this area was empty. Screech, bang, the car suddenly braked and the large piece of iron sheet fell in front of their car with a bang. The loud sound of a heavy object falling on the ground scared Tong Tong, who was in the car, and he shrank back. He shrank his head with both hands and shrank into the seat. At this time, a figure flashed on the top of the building where the iron sheet fell, and then a few steel pipes slid down. They smashed towards the roof of Tong Tong's car. But these steel pipes that were more than 10 meters long didn't fall on the roof of Tong Tong's car, because they were all suddenly bounced off in midair and flew to the side. "Do it." Lin Feng, who was watching the situation from afar, immediately ordered the communicator in his ear. Immediately, several groups of people rushed towards the building where Lu Meiqing and the others had gathered. On Tong Tong's side, when the people on the rooftop saw that the steel pipe they had thrown down was suddenly opened by something, he immediately realized that something was wrong and turned around, wanting to leave quickly. As soon as he turned around, he saw a group of people pointing their guns at him. Boom. Of course, he wouldn't just stand there and wait to be captured, so he threw out a level 4 fire ability. On the other hand, Lu Meiqing, who was still waiting for news in the hospital, was sitting in her duty room, but she did not notice that the people around her had suddenly disappeared. Just as she was sitting there, a few figures suddenly appeared at the door. Startled, she looked up and saw that it was a soldier in a green military uniform, standing quietly at the door with a gun pointed at her. "Don't move. Raise your hands high and stand up slowly." When Lu Meiqing saw them, she felt a chill down her spine. He stared blankly at them, not even able to react to the other party's request. The soldier at the door repeated again, "Raise your hands high and stand up slowly." Only then did Lu Meiqing come back to her senses. Soon she calmed down. She slowly raised her hands but asked them with a blank face, May I ask what you mean by this?" The soldiers did not answer her. Seeing her raise her hands and stand up slowly. Then they shouted at her, "Don't move." Then they pointed their guns at her and carefully walked towards her. As soon as they got close to her, they quickly locked her hands behind her back, and then escorted her out of the door. Lu Meiqing saw their cold faces and knew that things were not good. She panicked and didn't know what to do for a moment. So she was escorted out in silence. As soon as she went out and turned a corner, she saw Lin Hao standing against the wall with his arms crossed, looking at her calmly. Lu Meiqing looked at him without any expression on her face. When she walked to his side, she suddenly said, "It seems that you have already found out?" And Lin Hao just glanced at her, did not answer her, and directly turned to leave. It was not that he had already found out about her behavior, but that he had never trusted anyone. Other than his own family, how could he trust this woman who had only been working with him for a few months? At this time Lin Wenwen and Jiang Anan walked over from the side. After seeing Lin Hao, they couldn't help but ask him, "This Lu Meiqing's undercover ability is actually not bad. At least she stayed by your side for a few months without being discovered. If it wasn't for little Lu's special ability, she wouldn't have exposed herself." When Lin Hao heard this, he looked at her unhappily. "What's the matter? Are you speaking up for her?" Lin Wenwen shrugged his shoulders and said, "I just feel that she has the potential to be a substitute. If we can convince her to join our camp, she will also be a talent." After all, this Lu Meiqing was still an ordinary person. In this apocalyptic world where superpowers were gradually respected, if she had this courage and ability, why not use her more? Lin Hao looked at her and couldn't help but say, "You can go and give advice to the boss." The boss he mentioned was Lin Feng because Lin Feng was their big brother. "Of course I'll go now." At least she didn't come up with the idea of hurting Tong Tong. "I think she can still be saved." Then Lin Wenwen stuffed the lunchbox in her hand to him and turned to leave with Jiang Anan. Lin Hao held the lunchbox that she had stuffed into his hands and watched their backs as they left. Then he tilted his head, looked at his lunchbox and muttered to himself, "If you send food here every day, I don't have to go back. Obviously I was spoiled into a workaholic by you. Is it my fault?" On the other side, Lin Wenwen asked Jiang Anan curiously, "Who do you think is the one who tipped us off among the people we caught this time?" Jiang Anan, who had been silent, followed her with her bangs covering half of her face. Hearing this, she said, "If he is inside, he should identify himself." Lin Wenwen nodded and said, "Well, that's right. Smart people should know that they should identify themselves at this time." On the other side, in Lin Qiao's house, little Tingting was lying lazily on the sofa, but then he suddenly sat up. He shouted to the kitchen, "Papa! Mama is back." Before Wu Qingyue, who was in the kitchen, responded, Wu Yueling, who was sitting on the other side, raised her head. She looked at him with shining eyes and asked, "Really?" Little Tingting nodded to her, then sat on the sofa and stretched out his arms to her. "Take me to the balcony and I'll tell you where Mama is." Wu Yueling obediently came over, picked him up from the sofa and walked out to the balcony. At this time Wu Qingyue stretched his head out of the kitchen and said, "Be careful, don't get too close to the fence." Chapter 1376. The two of them went to the balcony, and there was a sun-shaded chair against the wall of the balcony. Wu Yueling sat on the chair with Tingting in her arms and asked him, "Where is Mama?" Tingting pointed forward and said, "We haven't reached the gate of the base yet. There are still a few kilometers to go." Wu Yueling asked him curiously, "How far is a few kilometers?" She was less than 7 years old and didn't know how far a kilometer was. Tingting thought for a moment and explained to her, "Well, you will be there in a few minutes by car." It'll take more than an hour to walk. Wu Yueling nodded as if she understood. Oh, will Mama be back in a few minutes? Tingting shook his head. Well, Mama will probably go to the office building first, not here. She'll probably have to wait until the night after it gets dark to come back here. As he spoke, he pointed to the gray sky. The sun had just set, so the light was still very bright. Hearing that he wouldn't see Lin Qiao until the night, Wu Yueling immediately pouted. Oh, she said disappointedly. At this time Wu Qingyue, who was wearing an apron, came out. He wiped his hands with a towel and asked Tingting, how do you know that your mother is back? Why didn't I feel it? Tingting glanced at him and said, because I was born by my mother, so I know. You're not born by my mother, so of course you don't know. Wu Qingyue first looked at him with a black face, then smiled speechlessly and said, so that's how it is. What a joke, he didn't want to be that guy's son. He wanted to be her man. Wu Yueling looked at Wu Qingyue blankly and then turned to look at Tingting. She didn't quite understand what they meant, so she could only show a confused expression. Seeing her expression, Tingting couldn't help but pinch her little face. He said, well, Lingling will understand this when she grows up. At this time Wu Qingyue looked in the direction of the base with some confusion and said, but isn't it too fast for her to come back now? It's only been more than 10 days and she's already up here? Could it be that she has already figured out the situation below so quickly? Ting crossed his arms in front of his chest and said with a puzzled expression, well, Mama came back earlier than expected. There were only two possibilities. One was that she already knew the answer she was looking for. Or the other possibility is that she encountered some other unexpected situation, so she couldn't stay down there anymore, so she came out early. Wu Qingyue glanced at him with a smile. Yes, that's right. These are probably the two possibilities. Little Ting is very smart. Hearing his sudden praise, little Ting immediately raised his chin. She said with a little pride, of course. I'm not an ordinary kid. All right, no matter what the reason is. We'll know when she comes back. Come on, wash your hands and eat. Wu Qingyue saw his little tsundere look and couldn't help but pick him up speechlessly. He was a little worried. This child wouldn't grow up to be the type to marry out, would he? Fortunately, Ting could only sense Lin Qiao's thoughts, not Wu Qingyue's. If he knew what Wu Qingyue was thinking, he'd probably spit out a mouthful of blood on his face, and then bite his father in anger. When Lin Qiao returned, she received news that Lin Feng had caught a group of spies. Well done. Who are they? She sat down at her desk and asked curiously. It was normal to have spies in the base, so she wasn't surprised. Lin Feng's ability to catch a group of spies was part of his job, but to be able to do it so efficiently was something to be proud of. They're from the last few batches. Most of them are from Hidden Cloud City and Skyfire Base. But this Lu Meiqing is from Hades Base. Duan Wan stood in front of her desk, flipping through a report. When she saw Lu Meiqing, she hesitated. Lin Qiao didn't seem to mind. She said softly, what's so strange about that? When it's beneficial to them, anyone can choose a side that benefits them. Maybe they're not satisfied with the conditions of our base. It's only natural that they want to move to a better place. This was normal, so it wasn't strange at all. Duan Wan looked at the report behind her, her expression unreadable. Speaking of which, there's an unidentified person who sent Deputy Chief Lin a message. But we don't know who it is. Lin Qiao looked at her in surprise. You mean to say there's a mole among them who sold them out? Do they know one of their own has betrayed them? Speaking of this, she showed an interested expression. Now that was interesting. Was it a spy? Duan Wan shook her head. It looks like they didn't realize they were betrayed before they were caught. From what Deputy Chief Lin said, he's probably looking for this person. He's probably trying to see if that person is among the people he caught. Lin Qiao muttered thoughtfully, it looks like this person isn't as simple as he looks. He's a double agent to this extent. He sent a message to Lin Feng, but Lin Feng still didn't know his identity. However, Lin Feng didn't investigate the other party's background out of respect. But what was the other party's purpose? Lin Qiao thought for a moment and suddenly asked, did you discover their intentions because of this person's message? After reading the report, Duan Wan passed it to Lin Qiao. She continued, I'm more curious about what kind of mentality or purpose the other party has in doing this. Moreover, he only snitched when those people were about to make a move. Because the situation where we first discovered the traitors wasn't because of this unidentified person, but because Xiao Lu discovered it first. Could it be that the other party wanted to create a way out for himself, so he turned to our side? If that was the case, then this kind of person shouldn't be allowed to stay. Who knew if she would change her mind one day and join someone else's camp? Lin Xiao took the report and nodded as she flipped through it. Maybe he already realized that his actions had been discovered, so it's normal for him to switch sides at the last minute. This kind of person was like grass on the wall, swaying wherever the wind blew. While the two of them were still talking, Lin Wenwen received the news that Lin Qiao had returned. At the same time, she also received the news that Yuan Tianxing had woken up. Really? He's awake? That's great. She finally put down the stone that was hanging in her heart and revealed a relaxed expression. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.